Get comfortable. Let your shoulders drop. There is nowhere you need to be right now, and nothing waiting for you tonight that cannot wait a little longer. Because what we are going to do over the next several hours is something that requires patience and stillness, and a willingness to look carefully at a world you think you already know. You know the Yellow family. You have always known them. They have been on television for longer than most people reading this have been alive, and their faces are so familiar, their voices so deeply embedded in the background of popular culture, that you could probably reconstruct the layout of their living room from memory without ever having consciously tried to memorize it. The blue couch, the television, the window, the stairs leading up to the rooms where the children sleep. You know the town. The power plant on the edge of it, its cooling towers always visible in the distance like a pair of enormous thumbs pressed against the horizon. The elementary school where Bart Simpson has been in the 4th grade since the year the Berlin Wall came down. The church where Ned Flanders has been praying, with spectacular sincerity and no apparent divine response, for 3.5 decades. The bar where Barney Gumble has been nursing the same essential hangover since 1989. You know all of this. And yet, here is what you may not have noticed. Here is what the show has been quietly, persistently, sometimes almost desperately trying to tell you for 37 years, hidden inside the jokes and the callbacks and the pop culture references and the celebrity cameos and the increasingly surreal plots that the later seasons deliver. Something is wrong in Springfield. Something fundamental and structural and invisible on the surface, but visible, enormously visible, once you know where to look. The wrongness is not accidental. It is not lazy writing or creative drift. It is the point. It has always been the point. Springfield is a town built on a lie, run by a lie, sustained by the collective decision of its residents to prefer the lie to the truth, because the truth, if they ever fully faced it, would require them to do something about it. Tonight, we are going to follow every thread. We are going to talk about nuclear contamination and corporate cover-ups and a coma that may explain the last 30 years of television. We are going to talk about who really shot Mr. Burns, and about why a billionaire who should have died decades ago keeps not dying, and about the most dangerous baby in American animation. We are going to talk about predictions that came true, and about the episode that broke the fandom, and about a mother who spent 27 years as a fugitive because she tried to stop a man from building biological weapons in her hometown. We are going to do all of this slowly. There is no rush. The night is long and Springfield is patient, and we have a great deal of ground to cover. Let your breathing slow. Let the day go. We are going somewhere quiet now. Section 1. The Nuclear Contamination Theory. There is a moment in the history of The Simpsons that almost no one took seriously when it happened. It is a small moment, embedded in an early episode, delivered without fanfare or dramatic emphasis. A fish is pulled from the river near Springfield's nuclear power plant. The fish has 3 eyes. His name, eventually given to him by the residents of Springfield with the cheerful casualness that characterizes this town's relationship with evidence of its own destruction, is Blinky. He becomes a minor celebrity. A politician uses him as a prop in an anti-Burns environmental campaign. Burns is required to eat the fish on live television to demonstrate that it is safe for human consumption. He eats it. The world moves on. Blinky the 3-eyed fish becomes a mascot, a punchline, a piece of Springfield iconography that gets referenced occasionally in later seasons, with the same tone you might use to reference the local sports team or the particularly aggressive squirrel that lives in the park. Nobody asks the obvious question, or rather, one person asked it, in the episode that introduced Blinky, and the question was buried so quickly that most viewers never registered it as a question at all. If the fish in the river near the nuclear plant have 3 eyes, what has the same water done to the people drinking it? The contamination theory is built on this question and on the decades of evidence the show has accumulated in its wake. Start with what we know about the Springfield nuclear power plant beyond reasonable dispute. The plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility owned by Montgomery Burns and managed by a rotating cast of incompetent, terrified, or deliberately negligent employees. It is the primary source of electrical power for the entire town of Springfield and a significant employer of the local population. It has been operating continuously since before the show began, which means it has been operating for at minimum several decades and possibly, given various pieces of evidence about Burns's personal history, for considerably longer. Its safety record is, in the plainest possible terms, catastrophic. Over the course of the series, the show has documented 342 separate safety violations at the facility. This number was presented in one episode as the finding of a regulatory inspection, and the inspector's recommendation was that the cost of bringing the plant into compliance would exceed $50 million. Burns declined to pay it. The violations were not corrected. The inspector was, through means that the show treats as comedy but which are, in any serious reading of the scenario, corruption, redirected or neutralized. What are these violations? The show provides some inventory: radioactive material stored improperly, containment barriers in disrepair, equipment maintained past any reasonable service life, radioactive waste disposed of in ways that contaminate local waterways and soil. There is, in one episode, a reference to waste being used as a paperweight on an employee's desk. There is, in another, a reference to radioactive rats living in the plant's maintenance tunnels, luminous and mutated. There are, in a third, human skeletons discovered in the basement of the facility, which the show mentions once and never returns to, because in Springfield, the most alarming things are the ones that nobody follows up on. The safety inspector for this facility, the individual whose professional responsibility is to stand between this level of negligence and the town of Springfield, is Homer Simpson, a man whose IQ, as established in multiple episodes, is 55. A man who has, in documented on-screen incidents, fallen asleep at the controls during emergency situations, introduced food into the reactor core as an experiment, and once caused a containment incident by dropping a donut. This man has been the primary human barrier between Springfield and nuclear catastrophe for the entire run of the series. The contamination theory says this is not an accident of casting. Homer Simpson is the safety inspector at the Springfield nuclear power plant because a competent safety inspector would shut that plant down within a week. Homer ensures the violations continue. He does this not through malice but through the magnificent dysfunction of his particular brain. A brain that the theory will argue has been degraded in part by the very environment it is supposed to be protecting. Let us talk about what the radiation has done to Springfield. Begin with the most visible thing. Every human being in this town is yellow. This is presented by the show's creators as an aesthetic choice, a deliberate decision to make the characters visually distinctive in a crowded animated landscape. And that is true as a production history. But the contamination theory asks you to also hold the diegetic reading, the reading that asks what, within the world of the show itself, this yellowness might signify. The yellowing of the skin is associated, in medical contexts, with liver dysfunction, with jaundice, with a category of conditions in which the body's processing of certain compounds is impaired. Long-term exposure to radiation can produce this kind of dysfunction. Long-term exposure to environmental toxins more broadly can produce visible changes in skin pigmentation. The contamination theory does not claim that the yellowing is definitively jaundice or radiation-induced pigmentation change. It claims only that the show has built a world in which there is a visible difference between people who live inside the contamination zone and people who visit from outside it. Look at the celebrity guest appearances. Every major celebrity who appears in Springfield is drawn differently from the Springfield residents. Their proportions are slightly more naturalistic. Their features are rendered with a slightly different set of conventions. The show explains this, in interviews and making of materials, as a deliberate design choice to make guest characters visually distinguishable from the regular cast. And again, that explanation is true on the production level. But within the world of the show, the visible difference between Springfield's permanent residents and their visitors from outside is, the contamination theory argues, evidence. People from outside Springfield do not look like Springfield residents because they have not been exposed to what Springfield residents have been exposed to. The visual difference is biological. The yellowness is a symptom. The residents of Springfield look the way they look because of what has been done to them, and the visitors look the way they look because they have not been done to in the same way. Now consider the physical characteristics of Springfield's residents in more detail. Homer Simpson has an overbite of cartoonish extremity. He has 4 fingers on each hand. His skull is shaped in a way that anatomically should not be possible. He has eyes that protrude from his head with a prominence that is, to put it mildly, unusual. These features are shared, in varying combinations and degrees, by virtually every character who lives in Springfield. The overbite, the four fingers, the eyes, the particular roundness of the cranium. They are the characteristic features of this population, and the contamination theory proposes that they are characteristic because they are the result of the same cause operating on the same environment for the same duration. Long-term radiation exposure does not, in real-world conditions, produce the specific constellation of physical characteristics the show depicts. The contamination theory does not claim that it does. What it claims is that within the exaggerated, cartoon logic world of Springfield, the physical features of its residents are the visual representation of what sustained environmental contamination does to a human population. And then there is the intelligence question, which is where the contamination theory becomes most specific and most disturbing. Homer Simpson's IQ of 55 is not, within any realistic framing of the show, consistent with his ability to hold employment, navigate daily life, drive a vehicle, participate in civic functions, and raise 3 children. People with IQs in this range in the real world require substantial support to manage independent living. Homer does not. He functions, badly and often disastrously, but he functions. The gap between his measured cognitive capacity and his demonstrated functional capability is one of the show's persistent background mysteries, and the contamination theory fills it with a specific proposition. Homer was not always this damaged. His brain has been degraded over time by his proximity to the nuclear plant and by the sustained radiation exposure of his working life. The Homer of the earliest seasons is more capable, more reflective, more capable of articulating complex emotional states than the Homer of later seasons. The Homer who, in an early episode, silently but powerfully conveys the sacrifice he is making when he gives up his dream job to ensure his family's financial stability. The Homer who, in another early episode, sits with his daughter at night and watches stars and finds, against his expectations, that this is enough. That Homer is still there in later seasons. He surfaces occasionally, in the moments when the show remembers what it is at its best, but he is surrounded by more noise, more chaos, more comedy that is less rooted in his humanity and more rooted in his dysfunction. The contamination theory says this is what radiation exposure does to a brain over time. It does not eliminate the person, it degrades them. It makes them less accessible. It pushes the thoughtful, loving, occasionally perceptive Homer deeper inside the impulsive, incompetent Homer until the deeper version is harder and harder to reach. The episode in which Homer discovers a crayon lodged in his brain since childhood is one of the most significant in the series for the contamination theory. When the crayon is removed, Homer's IQ increases dramatically. He becomes articulate, thoughtful, capable. He reads serious literature. He forms new friendships based on intellectual compatibility. He engages with the world around him in a qualitatively different way, and then he asks to have the crayon put back. His reasons are emotional and understandable. Intelligence in Springfield is a curse. It makes you see too clearly. It makes you feel too much. It makes you a stranger in your own life. The Homer with the crayon removed is miserable precisely because he can see his situation for what it is, and what it is not good. But the contamination theory notes something the episode itself does not dwell on. When the crayon is removed, Homer's IQ climbs significantly, but does not reach a level that would be considered exceptional. The crayon was suppressing his intelligence, yes. But the intelligence that remains after the crayon is removed is itself less than it should be. Something else has also been at work, something that cannot be reversed by removing a piece of wax from a frontal lobe. The radiation has done its own damage, alongside the crayon, and the radiation's damage is permanent. Homer chose the crayon because being smart in Springfield was unbearable. But the contamination theory says the choice was already constrained. The full intelligence Homer might have had, the intelligence he was born with or that he might have developed in a different environment, was not available to him even after the crayon was removed. Burns's plant had seen to that. And this brings us to the most important claim of the contamination theory. The most significant thing about the nuclear radiation that has been leaking from the Springfield plant for decades is not what it has done to Homer's IQ, or the fish in the river, or the color of everyone's skin. It is what it has done to the town's capacity for critical thinking, for asking questions, for looking at evidence and following it to uncomfortable conclusions. Springfield should, by any reasonable standard, be outraged. It should have been outraged for decades. The fish with 3 eyes appeared in the first season. The safety inspection findings appeared in later seasons. The dome in the Simpsons movie, the dome that the EPA put over the town because the contamination was too severe to leave unconstrained, should have been the final piece of evidence that broke through whatever denial had been sustaining the town's equanimity. The federal government looked at Springfield and said, "This place is too toxic to be in contact with the rest of America. We are putting a lid on it." And the residents of Springfield, inside the dome, continued with their lives. The contamination theory says they cannot do otherwise. The same process that produced 3-eyed fish and yellow skin and 4-fingered hands has also, at a neurological level, made the population of Springfield less capable of the kind of sustained critical reasoning that would allow them to connect these dots. The radiation that degraded Homer's IQ has, in less dramatic degrees, degraded everyone's. The result is a population that can see the evidence all around them and cannot quite process it into a conclusion that requires action. Burns knows this. Burns has always known this. The contamination theory's reading of Burns is that he is not merely a venal billionaire who prioritizes profit over safety. He is a man who understands radiation in the most personal and intimate possible way, because radiation is keeping him alive, and he has used that understanding to engineer a specific outcome. The plant leaks at levels that are not immediately lethal, but are, over time, cognitively and biologically degrading. The population remains functional enough to work, to consume electricity, to fill the labor force that keeps the plant running. But they are degraded enough, specifically degraded in the reasoning capacities most necessary for organized political resistance, to be incapable of challenging the arrangement. Springfield is Burns's company town. He has run it for a century. And the mechanism by which he maintains control is not violence or overt coercion. It is the invisible and ongoing administration of a substance that makes compliance the path of least cognitive resistance. The fish has 3 eyes. The cooling towers have cracked. The water runs from a source downstream of a facility with 342 violations. And the residents of Springfield smile, their yellow smiles, and go to work and come home and sit on their blue couches and watch their televisions, and never quite manage to ask the question that has been hanging in the air since the very first season. The contamination is the foundation. Everything else in Springfield is built on top of it. Before we move on to what comes next, pause here for just a moment. If you are watching this late at night, settling in for a long listen, drop a comment right now. Tell me where you are and what time it is wherever you happen to be. Something about knowing that people in different cities and different countries and different time zones are all sitting with the same strange yellow world at the same moment feels important to me. And if you have not subscribed yet, this is the moment. It takes 2 seconds and it means these videos keep going. Okay, back to Springfield. Section 2. Homer's Coma. The Dream That Never Ended. On the 1st of April 1993, Homer Simpson was in a hospital bed. He had arrived there by a chain of events that began with an April Fool's prank by Bart, escalated through an explosion that hospitalized him initially, and culminated in Homer attempting to reach a vending machine across the room and being crushed by it when the machine toppled. He flatlined. He entered what the doctors described as a coma. The episode, structured as a clip show, used his unconscious state as a framing device for revisiting earlier moments from the series. At the end of the episode, Homer woke up. He heard Bart's tearful confession at his bedside and sprang back to consciousness with a laugh and a lunge for his son's throat. The family laughed. The episode ended. The show continued. This is the official record. The coma theory says Homer did not wake up. What follows from that premise is one of the most extensively developed, most internally consistent, and in some ways most emotionally resonant fan theories in the history of American television. Its central claim is simple. Every episode of The Simpsons that has aired since that April 1993 episode is a dream being generated by the mind of a man lying in a hospital bed, losing brain function gradually, his unconscious constructing an elaborate and increasingly fantastical simulation of a life he is no longer actually living. The evidence begins with tone. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a different kind of show. Its first 3.5 seasons are, by nearly universal critical consensus, remarkable for their emotional grounding. The comedy is sharp and specific. The characters behave with a consistency that rewards close attention. Homer, in these early seasons, is not simply an id on legs. He is a man with a recognizable inner life, capable of tenderness and sacrifice and occasional genuine insight. The episode where he gives up his dream job to return to the plant and support his family. The episode where he sits with Lisa on the roof and watches stars. The episode where his relationship with Marge is genuinely at risk, and the show takes that risk seriously rather than defusing it with a punchline. After the coma, the texture changes. Not immediately, not all at once, but steadily and in one direction. The show becomes more surreal. Homer's incompetence scales past the merely human and into something that begins to feel like the logic of a dream. The plots become more fantastical. Homer goes to space. Homer befriends multiple presidents. Homer joins a secret society. Homer travels to dozens of countries. Homer holds hundreds of different jobs, each of which he abandons or loses without permanent consequences. Homer meets God, not once but twice. The escalation is so dramatic that there is a well-documented cultural phenomenon around it. The question of when The Simpsons went bad, which has been debated in fan communities for more than 20 years, with the answers clustering around specific seasons in the mid to late 90s. The coma theory does not say the show went bad. It says the show changed because the mind generating it was changing. Homer's dream is deteriorating as his brain deteriorates, and the increasingly outlandish plots of later seasons are not evidence of creative exhaustion, but of neurological decline. The dream is becoming less coherent because the dreamer is becoming less intact. Consider the aging problem. Nobody in Springfield ages. Bart has been 10 years old for 37 years. Lisa has been 8. Maggie has been 1. Homer and Marge have not accumulated a single visible year since the show began. This is presented as a standard feature of long-running animation, the floating timeline that allows the show to remain perpetually contemporary without the narrative complications of aging characters. Most viewers accept it as a convention and move on. The coma theory says this is the single most significant fact about Springfield, and it has the simplest and most devastating explanation available. Nobody ages because they exist inside the mind of a man who fell into a coma in April 1993. His unconscious cannot imagine his children growing up because he was not there to see it happen. He went to sleep when Bart was 10 and Lisa was 8 and Maggie was 1, and in his dream they are still 10 and 8 and 1 because that is how they exist in his memory. The dream cannot age them forward because it has no information about who they become. It only has who they were when he last saw them clearly, in the moment before the vending machine fell. The coma theory explains the freeze in a way that no other theory can match for emotional precision. The children are not frozen because of radiation or cartoon conventions or production decisions. They are frozen because a father who loves them cannot bear to imagine a version of their lives he is not present for. The dream gives them to him forever at the ages he knew them. And that gift, terrible in its implications, is also the most generous thing an unconscious mind can do for a man who may never wake up. 6 months before the coma episode aired, the show produced an episode called Homer the Heretic. In this episode, Homer, who has decided to skip church and stay home alone on a Sunday morning, has a direct encounter with God. God appears to Homer in a dream within the episode, and they have a conversation. God is, characteristically for the show, warm and somewhat deflating, and he tells Homer something. He tells him that Homer's time is coming. Not in a threatening way, but in the way you might tell someone who has been waiting for something important that the waiting is almost over. 6 months after this episode, Homer was in a coma. The coma theory reads this as setup. God told Homer, in the gentlest possible terms, that his conscious life was nearly finished, that what would follow would be different, that the time that remained to Homer in waking reality was short, and that something else was about to begin. The theological gag that the show plays for comedy in Homer the Heretic reads, in the light of the coma theory, as one of the most quietly prophetic moments in the series. There is the meta layer. The show knows about the coma theory. It has known about it for years. In a later season, an episode included a scene, presented as a deleted scene or leaked footage, in which Homer wakes from a long coma, and the entire history of the show is revealed to have been a dream. This scene was presented by the show as a hoax, as something planted by hackers, as not canonical. The official position was, this is a joke. The theory is not real, but the show made the scene. They animated it. They gave it the full production treatment. They created a complete, finished piece of television in which the coma theory was confirmed, and then they called it a hoax and walked away. The coma theory reads this as the most significant acknowledgement the show could give without formally confirming anything. They made the confession and hid it in a denial. Executive producer Al Jean addressed the theory in a 2015 interview. He said it was not true. He moved on. He did not explain why nobody ages. He did not explain the tonal shift after season 4. He did not explain why the show's plots became progressively more surreal in a pattern that tracks precisely with the expected cognitive deterioration of an untreated coma patient. He simply said it was not true. And perhaps he is telling the truth. Perhaps the coma theory is an elaborate coincidence, a pattern imposed on data that does not contain it by fans who want Springfield to mean more than it does. But here is what the coma theory does that no other explanation does. It makes every episode of The Simpsons, including the ones the fan community has spent decades dismissing as evidence that the show lost its way, into something worth watching. It makes Homer's impossible survival in episode after episode not a violation of the show's rules, but the simplest fact of his situation. He cannot die in the dream because his body is not in the dream. It makes the floating timeline not a production convenience, but the natural consequence of an unconscious mind holding on to the last moment it was fully alive. It makes every celebrity appearance not a ratings grab, but the dreaming brain processing the famous voices it hears drifting through the fog of the hospital room. And it makes the emotional core of the show into something genuinely heartbreaking. Homer Simpson wants, more than anything, to be with his family. He wants Marge to love him. He wants his children to need him. He wants Friday night on the couch, the beer cold, the television on, everybody safe and together and not going anywhere. The dream gives him this. The dream gives him this forever, in a loop that never stops, in a town that never changes, with children who never grow up and a wife who never leaves. Every episode of The Simpsons, from 1993 onwards, is a man dreaming about his family because they are the only thing worth dreaming about. The loop is not a prison. The loop is his heaven. Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns? In the summer of 1995, America was waiting for the answer to a question. The question was not particularly complicated, as questions go. It involved a cartoon character, a gunshot wound, and a mystery that a television show had spent the better part of a year constructing with unusual care. But the country took it seriously in a way that reflects something about that particular cultural moment, the summer when the O.J. Simpson trial was dominating every form of media, and the relationship between celebrity, crime, and narrative had become the dominant subject of American cultural life. Into this moment walked The Simpsons with its whodunit, and the country engaged with it as though it mattered, because in a certain light, it did. Mr. Burns had been shot. The end of season 6 had left him bleeding on a sundial, his assailant unknown, his fate uncertain. The show had done everything right by the genre. It had established motive for every major character, planted physical evidence throughout the episode, created genuine suspense, and then cut to credits before delivering a resolution. The summer of 1995 belonged to the question of who shot Mr. Burns. The answer, when it came in September, was Maggie Simpson. Maggie had been in the parking lot after the town meeting at which Burns had been publicly confronted about the consequences of his actions. Burns, as he does, had dismissed and insulted the assembled crowd, and then wandered out into the parking lot alone. There he had encountered the Simpson family car. He had reached in, for reasons that the show depicts as the reflexive acquisitiveness of a man who has never successfully distinguished between his wealth and his rights, to take Maggie's lollipop. In the struggle, his gun had fallen from his holster. Maggie had gotten hold of it. The gun had discharged. Burns had been shot. An accident. Or close enough to an accident that when Burns recovered consciousness and identified his shooter, the investigation went nowhere. Chief Wiggum himself noted that no jury in the world would convict a baby. The case was closed, except the contamination theory and the coma theory and the broader framework of Springfield conspiratorial thinking have spent nearly 30 years examining the resolution of this mystery and finding it insufficient. The official answer produces more problems than it solves. And some of those problems are large enough that the most serious analysts of this fictional crime have concluded that Maggie Simpson, if she fired that gun at all, did not do so by accident, and may not have done so without the knowledge of other parties. Let us start with the sundial. Burns fell on the sundial, and his hands came to rest, pointing at specific letters, which the episode treats as a clue. The letters, read from Burns's perspective, spell out M and S, Maggie Simpson. Case closed. Except Burns himself, when shown this evidence, dismissed it as meaningless. He said his hands had landed there by chance. He said the letters meant nothing. He said he had not deliberately positioned himself to communicate a message. Burns is many things, but he is not stupid, and he is not, in the moments following his hospitalization and recovery, in any condition to be spinning elaborate misdirections. If he said the sundial clue was meaningless, the most straightforward reading is that it was meaningless. This is the central evidentiary problem with the official resolution. The clue that ties everything together was specifically disavowed by the victim. Then there is the gun. Before the shooting, Burns's holster was observed to be empty. The gun was not on Burns's person at the time of the attack. Whoever shot Burns used a weapon that had already been separated from him, which means either that the gun was taken from him before the encounter in the parking lot, or that the gun arrived in the parking lot through some other channel. The official story accounts for this by saying Burns dropped the gun in the struggle with Maggie. But there is a gap between when the holster was observed to be empty and when the encounter with Maggie would have occurred, and in that gap, the gun's location is unaccounted for. Homer Simpson was carrying a gun earlier in the episode. He noticed it was missing. He asked about it. The gun was not found at that point. The gun subsequently appeared in the context of the Maggie explanation. The question of how Homer's gun ended up in Burns's possession and then in Maggie's hand is answered only by implication, and the implication requires a specific chain of custody that is never demonstrated. Burns's last words before losing consciousness included the phrase, "Oh, it's you." He recognized his attacker. He was not surprised by them. He was not frightened. The phrase carries the specific inflection of recognition, of encountering someone expected or at least known. Does Montgomery Burns know Maggie Simpson? Has he ever, prior to this episode, interacted with her in any way that would make her recognizable to him in a moment of crisis? The show does not establish this. Burns barely remembers Homer's name despite Homer having worked for him for years. The idea that Burns would greet a 1-year-old baby he has met perhaps once with the specific tone of, "Oh, it's you," requires explanation that the official resolution does not provide. There is the alternate ending. The show produced, in full, a complete alternate version of the mystery's resolution in which Smithers was the shooter. This alternate ending was professionally finished, fully voiced, fully animated, and then deliberately concealed. It was eventually revealed in a clip show hosted by Troy McClure, who dismissed it on the grounds that the DNA evidence pointed to a Simpson. The dismissal was framed as a joke, but the joke contained a reference to the O.J. Simpson trial, specifically to the way DNA evidence in that case had been set aside by the jury in reaching its verdict. Troy McClure said, in effect, that ignoring DNA evidence would be crazy. The show said this in 1996, 1 year after a real jury ignored DNA evidence in a real murder case. The wink is enormous. The show is telling you that official verdicts and available evidence do not always point in the same direction. Then, there is Homer's confession. In a later season, Homer states, apparently without being prompted by anything specific, that he was the one who shot Burns. He says this directly, on screen, and the show does not follow up on it. Nobody investigates. Nobody reopens the case. The richest man in Springfield was shot in an attempted murder, officially attributed to a baby, and the baby's father subsequently claims responsibility, and Springfield responds with the equanimity of a town that has decided, collectively and firmly, that some things are better left alone. Either Homer is lying. This is possible. Homer says many things that are not true, often without any apparent understanding that they are not true. Or Homer is telling the truth, in which case Maggie was not the shooter. In which case the official resolution of the most famous mystery in the show's history is wrong. In which case Burns, waking up in his hospital room and identifying Maggie as the person who shot him, was protecting someone. The Marge theory, which has been articulated with considerable care in fan communities, proposes that Marge was the shooter. Burns, the theory argues, was not a stranger to Marge. In an earlier episode, he became infatuated with her. He pursued her. He demonstrated a level of personal attention to Marge that he has never demonstrated to any other character. And a man who is infatuated with someone, who wakes up in a hospital bed with a bullet wound and the opportunity to name his shooter, might choose to protect the person he loves rather than condemn them. Maggie was the convenient alternative. A baby cannot be charged. A baby cannot be interrogated. A baby cannot be imprisoned or punished. If Burns decided, from his hospital bed, that he wanted to protect the woman he had been infatuated with, pointing the investigation toward Maggie was the cleanest possible solution. It closes the case. It names a perpetrator who cannot face consequences. The final scene. After the mystery is resolved, after everyone has left the room, Maggie is alone. She reaches into her blanket. She produces something. She makes a gesture, a specific gesture, moving her hand in a motion that mimics pulling a trigger. The show invites you to read this as confirmation. The baby did it. She knows she did it. She is essentially confessing in private. But there is another reading. Babies are mimics. They repeat what they see. A 1-year-old who watched a shooting happen, who was present in that parking lot, who saw whatever actually happened in the moments before Burns fell, might replay that motion the way all babies replay the things they have witnessed. Not confessing, remembering. Springfield closed the case. That is different from solving it. Section 4. How M.R. Burns is still alive. Let us try to establish how old Montgomery Burns actually is. This is, on the face of it, a simple question. The show should have an answer. It does not. Over the course of its run, the series has placed Burns's birth in the 1880s, the 1890s, and various other periods in the late 19th century. It has depicted him as having personal memories of the First World War, the Great Depression, the Second World War, and the years immediately following. He has referenced the Gilded Age not as history but as personal experience. He attended Yale at a time when Yale had a specific character that it no longer has. He worked on or around nuclear technology from the earliest days of its development, which would place him in professional proximity to the Manhattan Project. By the most conservative calculation, Burns is well over 100 years old. By more expansive readings of the show's continuity, he is closer to 130. The show treats this as comedy. Burns is comically ancient. His antiquity is a reliable source of jokes. He makes references nobody understands. He is startled by technologies that have been commonplace for decades. He calls Smithers by his father's name. He is, in the cartoon logic of Springfield, simply very, very old. And the comedy is in how very, very old he is and how little he seems to notice. But the contamination theory takes Burns's age seriously, because if Burns has been alive for over a century, he has not been alive through natural biological processes. Something is keeping him going. Something that the show has actually shown us, depicted on screen in multiple episodes, and presented as comedy when the implications of it are anything but. The Springfield Files episode is the most direct piece of evidence. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment at the plant. The treatment is, the show implies, radiation-based. It saturates him so thoroughly that he glows visible green for a period after each session. It sustains him for exactly 7 more days. Without it, he dies. With it, he staggers out of the facility in a state of irradiated euphoria and wanders through the woods near the plant, glowing softly in the dark, barely distinguishable from the surrounding environment, until the treatment's effects stabilize and he can function again. Burns is not alive despite radiation. He is alive because of it. He has been so thoroughly saturated with nuclear material for so long, and his body has adapted to this saturation so completely that he now requires it as a maintenance input the way a normal person requires food and water. Remove the radiation and his biological systems collapse. Provide it on schedule and the collapse is deferred. For another week, and another, and another. This produces the logical implication that Burns has a precise and sophisticated understanding of radiation biology, specifically of the effects of nuclear exposure on human physiology, because he has been managing those effects in his own body for decades. He knows the dose. He knows the schedule. He knows what happens at the margins. He knows because his survival depends on his knowing. He knows, therefore, what the plant's radiation is doing to everyone else. The doctor's scene. Burns visits a doctor who performs a comprehensive examination and delivers a finding that the show plays entirely for comedy and that the contamination theory treats as one of the most revealing moments in the series. Burns, the doctor reports, has every disease known to medical science. Every single one, all present simultaneously. And he is alive not because of medicine or treatment or any of the normal reasons people survive disease, but because the diseases are all present at once and they are preventing each other from killing him. Each disease is trying to dominate. Each disease is being blocked by every other disease. They are in a state of perfect, terrible equilibrium. The doctor calls this Three Stooges syndrome. The contamination theory reads this as the consequence of a century of radiation management. Burns's weekly treatments do not cure anything. They do not heal him. They maintain the equilibrium. They keep every disease in the balanced stasis that the doctor describes. They are, in the most literal sense, the control rods of Burns's body, adjusting the conditions inside him to prevent any single catastrophic process from gaining the upper hand. Remove the treatments and the equilibrium shatters. All the diseases surge simultaneously and Burns dies in a cascade of simultaneous organ failures. Smithers manages this schedule. This is one of the most important things to understand about the Burns-Smithers relationship. It is not merely loyalty, not merely devotion, not merely the complicated emotional attachment that the show depicts with a combination of comedy and genuine feeling. Smithers is Burns's life support. He knows the treatment schedule. He manages the appointments. He monitors Burns's physical state with the vigilance of a person who understands, at a level that nobody else in Springfield does, what happens if he is not vigilant. If Smithers is ever removed from his position, Burns dies. Not metaphorically, not eventually. Within a week, Burns misses a treatment. The equilibrium collapses. Every disease wins simultaneously. The oldest man in Springfield is dead within 7 days of Smithers' absence, and Smithers knows this, and this knowledge is the foundation on which their entire relationship is built. It is not just love that keeps Smithers loyal. It is the weight of knowing that his departure is a death sentence for the man he serves. Burns's connection to history adds another dimension. He has survived not just biologically but institutionally. His fortune has persisted across more than a century, which means it has survived the financial panics of the late 19th century, the crash of 1929, the economic disruptions of 2 world wars, the inflation of the 1970s, and every subsequent market upheaval. Burns did not inherit this fortune in the simple sense. He has actively managed it for longer than any legitimate investment strategy could sustain. The Burns family wealth, as depicted in the show, is not the product of a dynasty but of a single man's perpetual intervention in his own financial interests. The contamination theory proposes that Burns has been doing this deliberately, that the management of his fortune and the management of his health are the same project, approached with the same discipline, that every dollar he has ever spent on medical research, every doctor he has ever retained, every treatment he has ever undergone, is part of a single long-term project whose goal is not profit or power in any conventional sense. Its goal is continuation. Burns wants to keep going. Burns has always wanted to keep going. And the nuclear plant, the money, the political influence, the treatments, the Smithers who manages it all, are the infrastructure of continuation. He has been building this infrastructure for over a century. And it works. He is still here. He is still glowing faintly in the dark after his weekly treatments. He is still unable to remember his employees' names. He is still, in the most fundamental sense, the oldest continuous presence in a town that has changed everything around him while he remained constant. There is something at the end of the Burns immortality theory that is not comedy at all. It is the recognition that Springfield needs Burns to survive, not in spite of what he has done to it, but because of it. The town's economy depends on the plant. The plant runs on Burns's money and management. Burns survives through treatments that require the plant's infrastructure. The people who work at the plant contribute, through their labor and their proximity, to the conditions that keep Burns alive. It is a closed loop, a system that feeds itself, that has been feeding itself since before most of the town's residents were born. Springfield cannot remove Burns without collapsing the system that has kept it running. And Burns cannot die without surrendering the system he has built, which means facing accountability for what the system has done. So he does not die. And the system does not collapse. And the loop continues, turning slowly. Sustainable, terrible, indefinite. He is too expensive to die. And Springfield, whether it knows this or not, keeps paying the bill. Section 5. The Secret History of Mona Simpson. For the first several seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. This was not a mystery. It was barely a fact. She was simply absent, the way parents are absent from certain kinds of family stories. And Homer's relationship with her absence was expressed occasionally in the specific emotional profile he carried. His desperate need to be liked, his terror of abandonment, his clinginess toward Marge, his willingness to endure humiliation from Burns rather than risk losing the one stable thing in his life. These characteristics were attributed, in the show's emotional logic, to a general history of not being loved consistently well, and the specific cause of that history was not examined. Then, in the 7th season, the show examined it. The episode is called Mother Simpson. Homer, through a chain of comic circumstances involving his own faked death, discovers that his mother is alive. She has been alive for his entire life. The grave his father showed him as a boy was not hers. He had mourned a living woman for 27 years based on a story his father had told him, and the story was false. Mona Simpson had not died. She had become a fugitive. In 1969, Mona had been part of a left-wing activist group. The group had identified, through channels that the show does not fully explain, that Montgomery Burns was operating a biological weapons laboratory. Not a metaphor, not a corporate environmental violation of the kind already documented at the nuclear plant. A facility designed to produce weaponized biological agents. Burns was in the germ warfare business. Mona's group raided the laboratory. They introduced a counteragent that destroyed the biological material. They escaped. Mona was the last to leave, and in her final moments in the facility, she stopped to help someone who had fallen. That someone was Burns. She helped her enemy to his feet. Burns saw her face. He remembered it. He called the FBI. From that moment until the episode in which Homer finds her, a period of 27 years, Mona Simpson has been living underground, moving between identities, unable to return to her family, unable to contact her son. Burns maintained the warrant. Burns kept the FBI's interest in Mona alive through whatever combination of influence and pressure was available to a man of his resources. The pursuit was not justice. It was a grudge. Burns had been defied by a woman who destroyed something he valued, and he had spent nearly 3 decades ensuring she paid for that defiance. The contamination theory finds several things significant about this backstory. The first is the biological weapons laboratory. Burns was developing germ warfare agents in Springfield in 1969. This was contemporaneous with the early operation of the nuclear plant. Burns was not content with the contamination his nuclear operation was already producing in the local environment. He was also developing tools for deliberate, targeted biological mass casualty events. The two facilities, the nuclear plant and the germ lab, were operating simultaneously under the management of the same man, in the same town, with the same absence of regulatory oversight. The contamination theory asks, what else was Burns doing? What else has he built in Springfield that the show has mentioned only once and then moved away from? The second significant thing is what Mona's absence did to Homer. The contamination theory has already proposed that Homer's cognitive damage is largely attributable to radiation exposure. Mona's story adds a second layer. Homer grew up without a mother. He grew up believing he was the kind of son whose mother would rather die than stay. He grew up with a hole in his sense of himself that he spent his entire adult life trying to fill with food and television and the approval of a man who could never remember his name. The contamination damaged his brain. The loss of Mona damaged his heart. And the man who is responsible for both, who set in motion both the plant's contamination and the pursuit of Mona that kept her from her family, is the same man. Burns did not just take Homer's mother. He took the version of Homer that might have existed if his mother had stayed. The Homer who could have been smart and whole and capable of understanding his own life. The third significant thing is what Grandpa knew. Abe Simpson knew that Mona was alive. He had known for 27 years. He had told his son she was dead. He had pointed to a stranger's grave and called it hers. He had watched Homer grow up in the grief of that loss and said nothing. The show presents Abe's silence as a kind of protection. He was keeping Homer safe from the knowledge that his mother was a fugitive, from the knowledge that Burns was pursuing her, from the knowledge that bringing her home would put them all in danger. This is a comprehensible motive. It is the kind of decision people make in impossible situations, choosing the sustainable damage over the acute catastrophe. But there is another reading. The contamination theory proposes that Abe Simpson made a deal. At some point in the years following Mona's disappearance, Abe came to an arrangement with Burns, or with Burns's representatives. The arrangement was, in some version, you will not tell Homer about his mother, you will not seek to end the FBI's pursuit of her, and in exchange, your son will have a job at the plant. Guaranteed. Permanent. Irrespective of performance. Homer Simpson will be employed at the Springfield nuclear power plant for as long as he wants to be. This explains something that has puzzled viewers for decades. Homer is catastrophically bad at his job. He has caused or nearly caused dozens of incidents that should have resulted in his termination. In the real world, a safety inspector who behaved as Homer behaves would be dismissed after the first incident, certainly after the second, absolutely after the third, and the number of incidents Homer has been involved in far exceeds any reasonable count. And yet he is never permanently fired. Temporary suspensions, yes. Demotions, yes. But he always returns to the plant, to the same position, with the same access to the same equipment that he has been misusing for his entire career. The show offers a variety of explanations for this over the years. Burns's inability to remember Homer's name, union protections, Homer's inexplicable luck. But the contamination theory proposes the simplest explanation. Homer cannot be fired from the plant because Abe made a deal that guarantees his employment. And the deal was made with Burns. And the terms were that Homer stays employed and the question of Mona stays buried. When Mona finally returned, she could not stay away indefinitely. The grief of missing her son, the loss of 27 years, eventually became heavier than the fear of the warrant. She came back. Homer found her. They had time together. Not enough time, but time. And then Burns recognized her again, through a cab window, with the same eyes that had identified her in the germ lab in 1969. And the FBI came to the Simpson house, and Mona had to run again. Homer had to say goodbye to his mother for the second time. He knew, the second time, what he had not known the first time. He knew who was responsible. He knew that the man who signed his paychecks was the man who had stolen his mother. He knew that the plant he drove to every morning was the institution that had kept her away from him for the first 27 years of his adult life. He knew all of this, and he went back to work on Monday. He could not help it. He could not do anything else. The contamination had done its work, and the crayon had done its work, and the years of absence had done their work, and Homer Simpson was not capable of the kind of sustained, directed anger that would allow him to challenge the arrangement that had cost him everything. He was not capable of that anger any more than he was capable of understanding differential equations or writing a novel or seeing clearly the full architecture of his own suffering. Burns built him that way. Burns's plant made him that way. And Burns's pursuit of Mona ensured that the person who might have taught Homer to see clearly, who might have given him the mother's love and the mother's knowledge and the mother's political intelligence that could have made a different Homer possible, was absent for all the years when Homer was becoming who he is. Mona died in a later episode. Homer was with her. He held her hand. And in the quiet of that room, in the space between what was lost and what was left, the show achieved something that most television, even the very best of it, does not achieve. It depicted a grief that was not just for the person dying, but for all the years the dying had not happened, for all the life that had been stolen from both of them, for the version of Homer that had never gotten to exist, because a man on a hill had decided his grudge was worth 27 years of a family's pain. Burns was not in that room. Burns is never in the rooms where the consequences land. Section 6. Maggie Simpson, the silent genius. Maggie Simpson has not spoken in the main continuity of The Simpsons since she was 1 year old, which is to say, she has not spoken since 1989, which is to say, she has not spoken in 37 years. This is presented as a joke. Babies do not talk. Maggie is a baby. The joke is structural. Maggie is always positioned in a scene as though she is the one who understands it most completely, and she never speaks, because she is a baby and babies do not speak. The joke is very old now. The joke has been running for nearly 4 decades. And the Maggie theory proposes that the joke stopped being a joke sometime in the early seasons and became, gradually and without announcement, the truth. Maggie Simpson is not a baby who cannot speak. She is a person who will not speak. The evidence for this proposition is distributed throughout the series in a pattern that the Maggie theory reads as deliberate. Start with the clearest piece of evidence, the short film called The Longest Daycare. The Longest Daycare was released theatrically in 2012 and received an Academy Award nomination for Best Animated Short Film. Its protagonist is Maggie. Its narrative involves Maggie being processed through the Ayn Rand School for Tots, a daycare facility run with authoritarian efficiency, where children are tested on arrival and tracked by apparent intelligence. Maggie is placed in the gifted track. The film's plot requires Maggie to observe a threat to a butterfly she has become attached to, develop a plan to protect it, execute that plan against active opposition from adults and an aggressive peer, adapt when the plan encounters obstacles, and ultimately succeed in her goal. She does this entirely without speech. She does it through observation, planning, problem-solving, and execution. She reads the environment. She identifies the relevant agents. She predicts behavior. She improvises. She succeeds. This is not baby behavior. Babies do not engage in multi-step strategic planning. Babies do not read institutional systems and find their weaknesses. Babies do not anticipate adult behavior accurately enough to route around it. Maggie does all of these things, with a success rate of 100% across the course of the film, which earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Animated Short. The show has also, on multiple occasions, tested Maggie's intelligence directly. The results are not consistent across episodes, but the pattern that emerges from the episodes that address the question is consistent. Maggie's measured intelligence is extraordinary. In some episodes, it is described as off the charts. In others, it is more modestly exceptional, but it is never depicted as below remarkable, and the tests are administered by professionals who are, in the moment, genuinely startled by what they find. The Maggie theory asks, if she is this intelligent, why does she not speak? The answer begins with Lisa. Lisa Simpson is Maggie's older sister. Lisa is undeniably brilliant, arguably the most intelligent character in the entire show, certainly the most intellectually accomplished. She reads difficult books. She plays music at a professional level. She thinks carefully and argues rigorously and cares deeply about truth and justice and the world. She is, in the language of the show's consistent emotional logic, too good for Springfield. Too honest, too perceptive, too unwilling to pretend. And the show spends considerable time on what this costs her. Lisa is isolated. Lisa is mocked by her peers. Lisa is dismissed by adults who should know better. Lisa's intelligence is, repeatedly and specifically, a source of suffering for her rather than reward. The world of Springfield does not know what to do with someone who sees it clearly. The world of Springfield has, as we have discussed, a deep investment in not being seen clearly. Lisa's clarity makes her a problem. Maggie watched this. From her position in the corner, held in someone's arms or propped against furniture, sucking her pacifier, Maggie watched what happened to her brilliant older sister. She watched the isolation. She watched the mocking. She watched the dismissal. She watched Lisa fight episode after episode for recognition and respect that the world around her was structurally disinclined to provide. And Maggie concluded that visibility was a trap. The Maggie theory proposes that her silence is not a limitation but a strategy. She understood, early enough to have been implementing this strategy for her entire observable life, that the less she revealed, the more she could accomplish. The perfect disguise was the one already available to her: infancy. She was a baby. Nobody suspects a baby. Nobody monitors a baby closely enough to catch what a baby is doing. Nobody attributes to a baby the kind of intentionality and planning that Maggie demonstrates in The Longest Daycare, because that kind of intentionality is inconsistent with what babies are supposed to be. Maggie is supposed to be helpless and passive and dependent and oblivious. She performs helplessness and passivity and dependence and obliviousness with the dedication of a method actor who has been in character for 37 years. And every significant thing she has ever done, she has done within the cover of that performance. She shot a billionaire and it was treated as an accident because nobody considers the alternative. She led a rebellion in a daycare and nobody outside the film quite noticed because who pays close attention to what infants are doing when they think they are alone? She saves Homer's life in various episodes through actions that, examined carefully, involve more planning and situational awareness than any baby could plausibly bring to bear, but which are received as lucky coincidences because the alternative explanation is too disturbing to entertain. The contamination theory, applied to Maggie, produces something interesting. The contamination theory proposes that the nuclear radiation from the plant has had different effects on different people, depending on their biology and their proximity and the particular ways their systems respond to extended exposure. In Homer, the effect was cognitively degrading. In Burns, the effect was a grotesque form of biological maintenance. In Maggie, the Maggie theory proposes, the effect was amplification, the same environmental factor that degraded Homer's intelligence in his adult working years, acting on a developing brain in the earliest stage of its formation, produced the opposite outcome. Maggie's intelligence was not damaged. It was accelerated, expanded, pushed toward the extraordinary. Homer and Maggie as mirror images, one end of the spectrum and the other. The man diminished by his environment and the child who made of the same environment something else entirely. The coma theory has its own Maggie. In Homer's dream, the theory proposes, each member of the family represents something Homer needs. Marge is his love, Bart is his childhood, Lisa is his unrealized self, and Maggie is his hope. She is the one who has not been limited yet. She is the open possibility, the unwritten future, the silent promise that something extraordinary is still available. Homer cannot imagine Maggie's adult life because he does not know it. In the dream, she remains a baby. And in that perpetual infancy, she remains also a perpetual potential. She can be anything. She has not yet been closed off from anything. The genius that the dream gives her is not a specific prediction about who she becomes. It is a father's refusal to limit his youngest child's possibilities, even in a dream, even in a hospital bed, even at the edges of consciousness. And then there is the gun. After the mystery of who shot Mr. Burns was officially resolved, after Burns identified Maggie and the case was closed, after the family dispersed and the investigation ended, there was a final shot. Maggie was alone in the room. She looked around, carefully, deliberately, checking that no one was watching. She reached into her blanket. She produced the gun. She held it in her small hands and made a gesture that mimics pulling a trigger. This is the scene that the official resolution wants you to read as confirmation. The baby did it. She knows she did it. She is, in the privacy of an empty room, doing it again. The Maggie theory reads it differently. Watch the sequence again with fresh attention. The checking of the room is deliberate. It is the behavior of someone who understands the concept of an audience, who knows that certain things should not be witnessed. This is not reflex. This is strategy. A baby who accidentally discharged a gun does not subsequently demonstrate this level of awareness about the social consequences of reenacting that discharge in front of witnesses. The checking of the room is Maggie confirming that she is alone before she does something she has decided is private. It is the behavior of a person who makes decisions. It is not the behavior of an infant. Whatever Maggie is waiting to become, whatever she is planning in that enormous silence she has maintained since 1989, the show has not yet told us. We have seen fragments, glimpses of capability and intelligence and tactical thinking that exceed any explanation that treats her as a normal baby. We have seen her act with decision and effectiveness in moments of crisis, and then fold that capability back into the performance of infancy until the moment passes. She is the youngest Simpson. She is the most powerful person on Evergreen Terrace, and she has not yet decided, in 37 years of watching and waiting and being underestimated, to show what she is. When she does, Springfield will not be ready. Nobody is ever ready for the thing they never suspected. Section 7. The predictions: what is really happening. In the year 2000, The Simpsons depicted Donald Trump as a former president of the United States. The joke was about the absurdity of celebrity politics, about the direction a country goes when entertainment and governance become indistinguishable, about the kind of world that produces a Trump presidency as an inevitable punchline. 16 years later, Donald Trump was elected president of the United States. The internet responded as it always does to these moments, with screenshots, with viral sharing, with the question that now attaches itself to every discovered Simpsons coincidence. How did they know? The list of apparent predictions is long enough to fill its own video. The smartwatch depicted in 1995. The Higgs boson mass, written on a chalkboard in 1998, close enough to the measured value confirmed in 2012 to make mathematicians pause. The flu pandemic of a 1,993 episode with enough structural similarities to COVID-19 to be cited in mainstream media when the real pandemic arrived. The Siegfried and Roy Tiger attack, the Disney acquisition of Fox, Cypress Hill performing with the London Symphony Orchestra, depicted in 1996 and accomplished in reality in 2019, Greece's financial crisis, the FIFA corruption scandal, the Super Bowl results. There are several ways to explain all of this. The first explanation is statistical. The Simpsons has produced more than 750 episodes over more than 35 years. Each episode contains dozens of specific claims, jokes, and depictions about the direction of American culture, technology, politics, and society. If you generate that volume of content over that length of time, some of it will align with future events. The law of large numbers guarantees some hits, and confirmation bias, which is perhaps the most powerful force in human cognition, ensures that we remember the hits and forget the misses. The predictions that did not come true, the jetpacks and the moon colonies, and the political outcomes that went the other way, and the technological futures that never materialized. These are invisible in the conversation about Simpsons predictions because they do not generate the cultural response that the hits generate. We screenshot the matches. We scroll past the misses. This is a good explanation. It is a complete explanation for many of the predictions. It is the explanation the show's own creators endorse when asked about the phenomenon. Al Jean, who has been an executive producer on the show since its early seasons, said plainly that if you throw enough darts, you are going to get bullseyes. Bill Oakley, who ran the show during several of its most acclaimed seasons, said the predictions are mainly coincidence, combined with the cyclical nature of history. These are the people who made the predictions. They are saying they did not know. The second explanation accounts for the hits that seem too specific to dismiss as coincidence. The Simpsons writing staff has, throughout the show's history, been distinguished by the educational backgrounds of its writers. Multiple writers have advanced degrees in mathematics, physics, computer science, and related technical fields, in addition to the literary and comedic training that all writers on prestige television carry. When these writers make predictions about technology, they are not guessing. They are extrapolating from actual knowledge of the trajectories of actual fields. The Higgs boson mass on the 1998 chalkboard was placed there by a writer who understood the physics well enough to make an educated estimate. The smartwatch of 1995 was imagined by writers who understood the direction of miniaturization and wearable computing. The Disney-Fox merger was predicted by writers who understood media consolidation as a structural economic trend and followed that trend to its logical conclusion. These are not prophecies. They are analyses. They are what happens when very smart people study the present carefully and project its trajectories forward. The predictions feel magical because most people do not do this kind of analysis, or do not do it as rigorously, and so the results look like prophecy when they are actually precision. The Trump escalator is the clearest example of this. The show did not predict a Trump presidency in the way a fortune teller predicts an event. The show observed that Trump had been publicly discussing running for president since the late 1980s, that the conditions for a celebrity president were clearly developing, that the gap between entertainment and politics was narrowing in ways that the show was already engaged in satirizing, and it extrapolated those observations to their logical conclusion. The result looked like prophecy in 2016 because the observation was accurate and the extrapolation was correct. But there is a third explanation, the one that the contamination theory and the coma theory make possible, though neither of them requires it. This explanation does not involve the show knowing the future. It involves the show shaping it. The Simpsons is one of the most widely seen, most deeply embedded, most extensively quoted pieces of popular media in American history. It has been watched by hundreds of millions of people across multiple generations. Its references are part of the language. Its images are part of the visual vocabulary of American culture. Its observations about American life have been absorbed, consciously and unconsciously, by the people who watch them. And those people have gone on to make decisions, small and large, about the culture they inhabit. When the show depicted a Trump presidency in 2000, it planted a specific image in the cultural imagination. Millions of people saw that image. It became possible to imagine, which means It became slightly easier for the people involved in making it happen to make it happen, and slightly harder for the people who might have opposed it to see it as unthinkable. Not because the show advocated for it, but because the show made it thinkable. The joke created the possibility space in which the reality could form. This is not magic. It is the basic mechanics of how culture shapes reality. What we can imagine, we can do. What we depict, we prime ourselves to expect. What we laugh at, we normalize. The Simpsons, running for 37 years, covering the entire spectrum of American cultural life, has been normalizing things, decade by decade, that later arrived as reality, and part of the reason they arrived is that the show had already made them feel familiar. Springfield does not reflect America. America becomes Springfield. The show holds up a mirror for long enough that we start to resemble what we see. And here is the final piece of this. The piece that connects back to the contamination theory and the coma theory and the denial machine theory and all the other frameworks we have been building tonight. The Simpsons has been depicting, for 37 years, a world defined by the same patterns that define the real world. The corrupt billionaire who controls, the incompetent government that cannot or will not hold that billionaire accountable, the contaminated environment that its residents cannot quite see, the collective denial that maintains the status quo against all incoming evidence, the family that loves each other inadequately and imperfectly and without quite enough self-awareness, and yet keeps going. These are not satire. They are not exaggeration. They are description. The show has been describing the real world since 1989, and the real world has been, in the way that all worlds do, eventually arriving at the description that has been made of it. The predictions are not evidence of prophecy. They are evidence of clarity. They are the natural result of a show that has always understood America more precisely than America has understood itself, running long enough that the clarity becomes visible as a kind of second sight. Springfield is not a picture of what America might become. It is a picture of what America has always been. The show just wrote it down first. Section 8. The Principal and the Pauper Springfield's Denial Machine. There is one episode of The Simpsons that the fan community has spent nearly 30 years refusing to forgive. It has been ranked among the worst episodes the show has ever produced. The actor who voices the character most affected by it publicly expressed his displeasure. Critics described it as the moment the show betrayed its own continuity in the most destructive possible way. Fan wikis mark it with special notation. The show's own writers have acknowledged in interviews that they understand why people disliked it. The episode is called The Principal and the Pauper. It aired in the 9th season. Its central revelation is that Principal Seymour Skinner, a character the show had been developing since its earliest episodes, a man whose complicated relationship with authority and with his domineering mother had been the subject of significant comedic and emotional attention over 8 seasons, is not who he says he is. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. He served in Vietnam alongside the actual Seymour Skinner, who was taken prisoner and presumed dead. When he returned from the war, haunted by guilt and without an identity he wanted to return to, he traveled to Springfield to inform Skinner's mother of her son's death. Agnes, the real Skinner's mother, assumed that Armin was her son. He let her believe it. He stayed. He built a life inside the borrowed identity. He became, over time, the Skinner that Springfield knew. Then the real Seymour Skinner returned. Here is what happened next. Springfield gathered. The truth was fully exposed in a public setting. Every resident of the town was made aware that their principal, the man who had run their school for 2 decades, was an imposter. The actual Seymour Skinner was present. The choice between acknowledging the truth and maintaining the fiction was explicit. Springfield voted to maintain the fiction. A judge issued a decree. The imposter was legally established as the authentic Skinner. The real Skinner was placed on a train and physically removed from Springfield. The judge made it a punishable offense, explicitly, to ever mention what had been learned. The truth was criminalized. The messenger was exiled. The fan community read this as the show losing its mind, as the writers deciding to throw away years of character development for the sake of a single episode that reset everything to factory settings. As a creative failure so fundamental that it permanently damaged the show's credibility, the contamination theory reads it as the show's most honest episode. Because everything the episode depicts, the collective choice of comfort over truth, the legal enforcement of a convenient fiction, The exile of the person who insisted on reality is exactly how Springfield has always worked. This episode did not break the show's continuity. It made the show's continuity visible for the first time. It showed you the mechanism that has always been operating, just below the surface of every Springfield reset, every forgotten catastrophe, every time a three-eyed fish became a mascot, and a nuclear contamination became background noise, and a billionaire's 342 safety violations became a story without a resolution. Springfield has always voted to forget. The Principal and the Pauper was the one time the show depicted the vote. Think about the events that Springfield has been required to absorb and then set aside over the course of the series. The entire town has been covered by a government dome because the contamination was too severe to leave uncontained. The dome came down, the show continued, and nobody mentioned the dome again. The town has been destroyed and rebuilt on multiple occasions by various disasters, natural and artificial, and each time the reconstruction has been so complete that the destruction might never have happened. Characters have died and returned. Relationships have been established and erased. Plots have been resolved and then reversed. The timeline has contradicted itself so many times that the very concept of a consistent Simpsons continuity is a fiction maintained by collective willingness to not examine too closely. The Principal and the Pauper is the show admitting that the fiction is maintained on purpose, that it is a choice made by the community, renewed at every opportunity, to prefer the version of events that allows them to continue as they are over the version of events that would require them to do something different. This is not a cartoon trope. This is how real communities work, especially small ones, with strong economic and social dependencies. The community that questions why the fish have 3 eyes risks the shutdown of the plant that employs most of its working adults. The community that investigates the safety violations risks the collapse of its economic base. The community that confronts Burns risks everything Burns' money sustains. So, the community does not confront Burns. It names the fish and moves on. It elects officials who are willing to look the other way. It passes the decree that makes it illegal to mention what everyone has seen. And anyone who insists on the truth, anyone who shows up with evidence that the official narrative is a lie, who refuses to participate in the collective forgetting, who keeps saying the actual Seymour Skinner's name in the face of the judge's decree, gets tied to a train and expelled from the community. The exile of the real Seymour Skinner is not a single event. It is a recurring pattern in Springfield's history. It is what happened to Mona Simpson. It is what would happen to anyone who succeeded in making the contamination impossible to ignore. The community's survival, as it conceives its own survival, depends on maintaining the arrangement. And the arrangement depends on maintaining the lie. The contamination theory connects this to Burns directly. Burns is the architect of Springfield's denial machine. He did not build it from scratch. He simply made it necessary, over decades, through the accumulated weight of his facility's violations and his personal history of suppressing accountability, until the habit of forgetting became the culture of forgetting, became the legal structure of forgetting. Springfield does not forget because Burns commands it to forget. Springfield forgets because it has learned, over 37 years of not being protected by the people who should have protected it, that forgetting is the most available form of survival. The Principal and the Pauper is not the worst episode of The Simpsons. It is the most honest one. It is the only episode that does not do the forgetting. It depicts the forgetting explicitly in real time, with the legal apparatus made visible and the exile of truth shown as the specific consequence of truth's arrival. The real Seymour Skinner is somewhere on that train, traveling away from a town that chose the comfortable lie over the inconvenient man. He is the last honest person in Springfield, and Springfield made him illegal. Section 9. Where is Springfield? Let us try to locate Springfield on a map. We cannot. This is a fact about the show that is so well established, so deliberately cultivated by the writers across decades of specific and contradictory geographical details, that it has become one of the show's defining characteristics. Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history, and it exists nowhere. Every attempt to fix its location is confounded by another episode that places it somewhere incompatible. Its climate is inconsistent. Its distance from other cities varies. Its coastal access appears in some episodes and disappears in others. It borders states that cannot all be simultaneously bordering. It contains geographic features, deserts and mountains and coastlines and farmland that cannot coexist in any real American location. Matt Groening, the show's creator, said in a 2012 interview that he named the town after Springfield, Oregon, the city near Portland where he grew up, and that the name was chosen because it is one of the most common city names in America, present in dozens of states. For a brief period after this revelation, fans who had spent years building geographical theories revised their frameworks. Springfield was in Oregon. The answer had been given, and then the show continued to contradict it. Episodes set after the interview continued to place Springfield in geographical contexts incompatible with Oregon. The show's writers kept the mystery alive because they understood something important. The mystery was the point. The surface-level explanation for Springfield's unfixable geography is that it is everywhere, that it is the universal American small city, that by being nowhere specific, it belongs to everyone. This is true. The show was designed to resonate with the broadest possible American audience, and a town that could be any of their towns serves that purpose better than a town that is specifically and only in one state. But the contamination theory reads the geographical unfixability of Springfield as evidence of something more specific. A town with no fixed location cannot be regulated by any specific state's environmental agency. A facility in an unlocatable town cannot be definitively assigned to any particular federal district's oversight. The legal and regulatory apparatus that should be capable of addressing the contamination, of holding Burns accountable for 342 safety violations, of investigating the three-eyed fish and the cracked cooling towers and the human skeletons in the basement, requires a fixed jurisdiction. It requires the ability to say, this facility is in this state, which means it falls under these regulations, which means this agency has authority. Springfield floats between jurisdictions. It is never definitively anywhere, which means it is never definitively under anyone's authority. Every regulatory approach requires the establishment of venue, and Springfield's venue is permanently contested. The town's geographical ambiguity is not just a comedy device. It is, in the legal and regulatory sense, a shield. Burns has, throughout his career, benefited from this ambiguity. The plant operates, the violations accumulate, the water carries what it carries, and the regulatory question of who has jurisdiction over what is happening in Springfield remains, as it has always remained, unsettled. The coma theory has a simpler reading. Homer's dream does not know where it is set because Homer does not know where he is. He is in a hospital room somewhere. Springfield is assembled from fragments of his memory, from every place he has ever been and every landscape he has ever seen, layered and compressed by the logic of a dreaming mind that does not organize space cartographically but emotionally. The inconsistencies in Springfield's geography are the inconsistencies of memory, the way a place you love seems both larger and smaller than the space it actually occupies, the way distances in dreams are measured in feeling rather than miles. The denial machine theory offers a third possibility. Springfield has declared its own location classified, not officially, not through any formal process, but through the accumulation of decisions, small and large, not to pin itself down, not because any single resident made that decision, but because the collective interest of a community with things to hide is served by remaining unlocatable. Landing on a map means accountability. Landing means someone shows up with a badge and asks about the fish. Springfield prefers to float. It has been floating for 37 years. It has accumulated deserts and mountains and coastlines and farmland, all of it improbably coexisting in a single location that cannot be found on any existing map. It is everywhere, and it is nowhere, and it is, as long as it remains in this state, safe from the specific, targeted consequences of being anywhere in particular. The three-eyed fish swims in a river that flows from somewhere to somewhere. The contamination drifts in an atmosphere that connects to everything. But Springfield, the source of both, maintains its geographical sovereignty by simply, persistently, refusing to be located. Section 10. The Floating Timeline. Why Nobody Ages. Bart Simpson was 10 years old on the 17th of December, 1989. He is 10 years old right now. 37 years have passed in the real world. 0 years have passed in Springfield. The characters exist in a permanent present tense, locked at the ages they were when the show began, living through decades of cultural change, political upheaval, technological transformation, and historical event without adding a single year to their biological age. The year changes around them, episode by episode, as the show incorporates contemporary references to keep itself current. But the characters do not change. Bart is 10, Lisa is 8, Homer is 39, Marge is 34, Maggie is 1. They will remain these ages for as long as the show runs, which is to say, apparently, forever. The industry term for this is a floating timeline. It is standard practice in long-running animated series. The show's present is always the viewer's present. The past reshapes itself to remain consistent with the present. Homer and Marge's backstory has been rewritten at least 4 times over the course of the series, each rewriting moving their formative years forward in time to remain plausible for 2 people currently in their late 30s. In the early seasons, they were young in the late 1970s. In the middle seasons, they were young in the 1980s. In later seasons, they were young in the 1990s. The love story is the same. The characters are the same. The era keeps sliding forward because the floating timeline demands it. Most viewers accept this without difficulty because it is a convention of the form, and they have been watching the show long enough to have internalized the convention. Of course, nobody ages. That is how animated shows work. But the floating timeline, examined carefully and without the comfort of convention, is a genuinely strange thing. And the theories we have been discussing have been circling it all night, because every one of them arrives at the same question about it, and every one of them has a different answer. The contamination theory says, the radiation has done something to the biology of Springfield's residents that prevents normal aging. This is the most scientifically implausible of the available explanations, and the contamination theory acknowledges this by not pressing too hard on the mechanism. It simply notes that a population saturated with radiation for decades, in a show that has already produced 3-eyed fish and a glowing billionaire and a man with every disease simultaneously, is a population to which extraordinary biological outcomes are already canon. The coma theory says, the characters do not age because they exist inside Homer's unconscious, which froze them at the moment he last saw them. This is the cleanest explanation available. It does not require any mechanism. It does not require any biology. It requires only the simple fact of what a dreaming mind does with the people it loves. It holds them still. It preserves them at the last moment of full presence. The denial machine theory says, Springfield has decided not to age. Not consciously, not through any formal process, but through the same collective social agreement that expelled the real Seymour Skinner and criminalized the truth about the plant. The community has agreed that time is not passing, that the children will not grow up, that the adults will not get older, because admitting that time is passing would mean admitting everything else that comes with time. The decay, the change. The thing that cannot be denied once you start counting the years seriously. But there is a 4th reading of the floating timeline, and it is the one that the show itself seems most invested in, though it never quite articulates it directly. The Simpsons is not a story about Homer Simpson specifically. It is a story about a type of person, a type of family, a type of American life that the show has been holding up to its audience since 1989. Homer is not an individual character in the way that characters in serialized drama are individuals. He is an archetype. The father. Marge is the mother. Bart is the son. Lisa is the daughter who sees too clearly. Maggie is the youngest, the open future, the one who has not yet been defined. These are not people who can age because they do not age in the same sense that ideas age. The working-class father who loves his family and fails them and loves them again. The patient wife who holds everything together because nobody else will. The rebellious boy who is more scared than he seems. The brilliant girl who is lonelier than she lets on. These characters have been part of the American cultural imagination for longer than The Simpsons has been on the air, and they will be part of it after the show ends, in some form or other. The floating timeline is the show's acknowledgement of this. The characters do not age because the types they represent do not age. The problems of the Simpsons family are not problems that belong to a specific era. They are the permanent problems of love. The permanent problems of family. The permanent problems of trying to be a good person in a world that makes goodness difficult. These problems do not have a resolution that sends the characters off to a satisfying ending. They have only the ongoing negotiation of people who love each other imperfectly and keep trying anyway. And there is something about that refusal to resolve, that determination to stay in the middle of things rather than arriving at a conclusion that the show has understood from the beginning and that its audience has confirmed over 37 years of continuous viewing. We do not want The Simpsons to end. We do not want Bart to grow up and Lisa to leave and Homer to retire and the house to sit empty. We do not want the resolution. We want the ongoing. The loop, the Sunday night return to the yellow house where everybody is still there, still imperfect, still loving each other through the imperfection. The floating timeline is the show's gift to its audience. It is the promise that the family will always be there when we look for them, unchanged, in the same house, having the same struggles with the same love underneath. It is the promise that some things do not have to end. It is also, the coma theory notes, the promise of a dreaming man that he will never have to wake up and find out what is waiting for him in the world where time has been passing without him. The loop is ours as much as his. We built it. We maintain it. We tune in every week and keep it running. And as long as we do, Springfield will be exactly where we left it. The cooling towers on the horizon, the yellow house on Evergreen Terrace, the family inside it, frozen in the amber of a permanent present, loved too much to be allowed to change. Section 11. The hidden tragedies of Springfield. Not all the mysteries of Springfield attach themselves to the main family or to the billionaire on the hill. Some of them live in the margins, in the background characters who appear and disappear without the continuity of attention the main cast receives, in the people Springfield treats as reliable sources of comedy without noticing what the comedy is covering. Let's start with Hans Moleman. Hans Moleman is a very small, very old, very fragile man with enormous glasses and a voice of practiced resignation. He appears in the background of Springfield in a wide variety of contexts, and his appearance almost always presages his suffering. He is hit by cars, he falls into holes. He is buried alive on multiple occasions, crushed by falling objects, electrocuted, burned, attacked by animals, and has died, by any reasonable count of the specific incidents depicted on screen, dozens of times. Not in dream sequences or Treehouse of Horror episodes. In the main continuity of the show, Hans Moleman dies and then appears in the next episode alive and intact and ready to be subjected to another round of Springfield's particular version of misfortune. The show treats this as a running gag. The regularity and variety of Moleman's deaths is the joke. Don't think about it. The contamination theory thinks about it. In one episode, Moleman gives his age as 31. He appears to be in his 80s or 90s. This gap between his stated age and his apparent age is the most significant fact about him, and the contamination theory fills it with a specific proposition. Moleman has been subjected to radiation exposure at levels that have aged him catastrophically. Something about his particular biology, or his particular proximity to the plant, or his particular habits and lifestyle, has resulted in his experiencing the equivalent of 60 additional years of aging in approximately 30 biological years. He is 31 and he looks 85, because the same process that produces three-eyed fish and yellow skin and cognitive decline, operating at much higher concentrations on a particular biology, has run the clock on him with terrible efficiency. He has been compressed. Decades of biological time have been packed into a fraction of the years they should have occupied. And yet he does not die. Not permanently. He absorbs fatal damage and then reappears. The contamination theory proposes that the same extreme radiation exposure that has aged him so dramatically has also, in its way, made him nearly impossible to kill permanently. His cellular mechanisms have been so thoroughly altered that they have developed a kind of grotesque regenerative capacity. Not health, not strength, but a refusal of permanent termination. He is the contamination's most visible monument. He is what happens when Burns's plant gets its full effect on a human being, and the human being does not die but does not quite survive either. The contamination theory makes him evidence. Now let's talk about Ned Flanders. Let's talk about the man who does everything right and receives nothing in return. Ned Flanders is, by every visible metric, the best person in Springfield. He is generous, he is patient, he is forgiving, he is devoutly religious. He is a conscientious parent, a thoughtful neighbor, a man who has consistently chosen the difficult right thing over the easy wrong one in ways that would, in a story about a just world, be rewarded. He is everything Homer Simpson is not. and he lives next door to Homer Simpson, which means he has spent 37 years in proximity to a man who embodies everything Ned has organized his life around not being, and who has been rewarded by the universe for that embodiment while Ned has not. Ned's wife died because Homer dodged. Homer was at a NASCAR event, in the stands, and a promotional t-shirt cannon was firing gifts into the audience, and Homer moved to avoid the incoming projectile, and the projectile continued on its trajectory and struck Maude Flanders and knocked her from the stands and killed her. Homer's self-interest, expressed as a reflexive dodge, was the cause. Maude died because Homer moved, and Ned, because of who Ned is and what Ned was conditioned to be, forgave Homer. He grieved, and he forgave, and he continued to live next door to the man whose selfishness killed his wife, and he continued to treat that man with the patient goodwill that is Ned's characteristic mode of engagement with a world that has given him every reason to abandon it. The conditioning episode. In a later season, the show provides Ned's psychological backstory, and what it reveals is not a man who is naturally good, but a man who was made to be good through an intensive behavioral modification program administered in childhood. Ned was a violent, uncontrollable child. His beatnik parents took him to a psychiatrist who spent months systematically suppressing his aggression through what the show calls the University of Minnesota Spankological Protocol. After this treatment, Ned was calm. He was polite. He was unfailingly cheerful. He was incapable of expressing anger in any healthy way. The result of the conditioning is not that Ned's anger disappeared. It is that Ned's anger was so thoroughly suppressed that it became invisible even to him, and it has been accumulating beneath the surface of his cheerfulness for his entire adult life. We see what lies beneath, briefly, in the episode when a hurricane destroys his house. The community rebuilds it badly, and when Ned sees the result, the conditioning breaks. He screams. He insults everyone within range. He says things he has never been able to say. The things he says are specific and targeted, and suggest that he has been cataloging the indignities of his life with a precision that his cheerful surface completely conceals. He is then institutionalized, which is perhaps the show's bleakest joke. The one person in Springfield who finally tells the truth about what has been done to him is sent to a psychiatric facility, while the people who did it to him continue unchanged. There is a theological dimension to the Flanders story that the show has returned to repeatedly and never fully resolved. Ned believes in God. He talks to God. He prays to God. He has organized his entire understanding of his suffering around the belief that God has a plan, and that the plan includes the loss of Maude and the patience required to live next to Homer and all the other costs that goodness has exacted. From him, Homer has had direct conversations with God. God appeared to Homer in a dream and spoke to him specifically and personally. God has been present in Homer's life in a way that Ned's theology would absolutely require that God be present in Ned's life, and yet isn't. God talks to Homer and ignores Ned. This is not an oversight. The show is deliberate about this asymmetry. The drunk, selfish, cognitively damaged man who sleeps through church and uses religious occasions as excuses for self-indulgence receives direct divine attention. The devout, patient, careful man who has dedicated his life to his faith receives silence. The contamination theory reads this as the system's final judgment. The system, which is Burns's system, which is the system of Springfield, rewards compliance and punishes integrity. Homer is compliant. He goes to work. He does not ask the questions that would create problems. He absorbs the radiation and the indignity and the sense that something is wrong without ever quite connecting the dots. The system gives Homer divine attention, not because he deserves it, but because he is useful. Ned is a risk. Ned's goodness is the kind of goodness that, unchecked, might generate the moral clarity to actually challenge the arrangement. So, the system gives him nothing. It makes his goodness costly. It kills his wife. It silences his God. It keeps him on the edge of breakdown, year after year, just functional enough to stay contained. Ned Flanders lives next door to Homer Simpson. He has always lived next door to Homer Simpson. He has always been on the better side of the moral ledger. He has always received the worse end of the deal. This is the final hidden tragedy of Springfield. Not the contamination and not the coma, and not the mystery of who shot Burns, and not the geological impossibility of the town's location, and not the unfixable floating timeline. It is the simple, unadorned fact that in this world, goodness is not protected, kindness is not rewarded, faith is not answered, the people who try hardest get the least, the people who barely try get everything. And the gap between them, the gap between Ned's house and Homer's house, between the man who does everything right and the man who does everything wrong, has never once closed in 37 years. Because the system is not designed to close it. The system is designed to keep Homer in Sector 7, G and Ned in his church, and Burns at the top, and the contamination in the water, and the children at the same ages. They were in 1989, and the timeline floating and the truth on that train getting farther from Springfield with every mile, while the town maintains its decree of silence and the loop turns slowly and nothing is allowed to change. Section 12. The final synthesis. Everything connects. We have spent a long time in Springfield tonight. We have walked through the contamination, the invisible poison that seeps from the cracked cooling towers and saturates the soil and the water and the blood of everyone who calls this place home. We have sat with the coma, the dreaming mind of a man who fell unconscious in 1993 and has been constructing his family's story from a hospital bed ever since. We have examined the shooting and found it unsatisfying. We have looked at the billionaire on the hill and tried to understand how he has persisted when everything about biology and time should have finished him long ago. We have followed Mona Simpson into the underground and come back carrying the weight of 27 stolen years. We have watched Maggie watching and understood something about what she sees that nobody else in the family has figured out yet. We have watched the town vote to forget. We have watched the town refuse to be located. We have watched the timeline refuse to move. We have looked at the man who ages without aging, and the woman whose conditioning substitutes for character, and the neighbor whose goodness has cost him everything. Now, in the quiet of the night's final section, let's put all of it together. The contamination theory and the coma theory are not alternatives to each other. They are not competing explanations that cancel each other out. They are complementary, operating at different levels of the same reality. The contamination is what happened to the external world. It is the history of what the plant has done to Springfield's ecology, its biology, its water, its air. It is the yellowing of the skin and the degrading of the intelligence, and the three-eyed fish and the dome, and the accumulated weight of 342 violations that were never addressed. The contamination is the story of what powerful institutions do to the communities they are supposed to serve when accountability is absent. It is the story of Burns. The coma is what happened to an individual inside that external reality. Homer Simpson lived in the contaminated town, worked at the contaminating plant, absorbed the damage, and then fell unconscious in April 1993, and has been dreaming of his family from a hospital bed ever since. The coma is the story of what a person does with love when the external world has taken everything else. It is the story of Homer. And the denial machine is what both of these produce in a community that has been living with their consequences long enough to have built an entire culture around not acknowledging them. The vote to keep the lie. The decree against truth. The exile of the real Seymour Skinner. The casual acceptance of the three-eyed fish as mascot. The continued employment of Homer as safety inspector. The continued operation of the plant despite its history. The geographical ambiguity that makes accountability impossible. The floating timeline that makes change impossible. The collective, ongoing, institutionalized refusal to take the most available reading of the available evidence. Burns connects all three levels. He is the cause of the contamination. He is the reason Homer's mother was absent, which is one of the reasons Homer became the person who, when he fell into a coma, needed most desperately to dream of his family as permanent and unchanging. He is the architect of the denial machine, not its creator exactly, but the condition that made it necessary. Without Burns's plant and Burns's violations and Burns's willingness to prioritize his survival over Springfield's health, there would be nothing to deny. He is still alive because of the same radiation that damaged Homer. He is still alive because Smithers manages the schedule. He is still alive because the system he built requires his continued operation. And he is still in the mansion on the hill, ancient and glowing faintly and unable to remember his employees' names, sustained by the same mechanisms that have been sustaining him for over a century. The show has told us all of this. It has told us directly, in specific episodes, and it has told us through accumulation, Through the 37-year pattern of what it depicts and how it depicts it, and what it allows to be resolved and what it ensures stays open. The contamination theory and the coma theory and the denial machine theory did not invent these elements. They found them in the show. They followed the threads that were already there and arrived at the conclusions the threads lead to. Why has the show not confirmed any of this? Why has it held these elements in suspension for 37 years without ever resolving them into a definitive reading? Because resolution would end it. Because the day the show confirmed the coma theory would be the day every episode that follows carries the unbearable weight of confirmed tragedy. Because the day the show confirmed the contamination theory would be the day Springfield became a story about suffering rather than a story about love. Because the day the show confirmed the denial machine theory as its central thesis would be the day the comedy curdles into something too dark to sustain. The show needs the mystery. The mystery is what allows it to be both funny and heartbreaking, both a cartoon and a portrait, both entertainment and something that has been sitting quietly at the center of American popular culture for 37 years, holding something up for the audience to see, something about the families we come from and the communities we live in, and the distances between the lives we have and the lives we wish for. There is a reason we keep watching. There is a reason people who stopped watching years ago find themselves, occasionally, pulled back in. There is a reason the show's early seasons are rewatched more than almost any other television in history by people who have already seen every episode. There is a reason that a theory about a man dreaming in a hospital has been circulating in fan communities for nearly 30 years and shows no sign of being forgotten. The reason is Homer. It is always ultimately Homer. Homer Simpson is not a well-drawn character in the literary sense. He is not psychologically complex, or morally sophisticated, or particularly articulate. He is a man of appetite and impulse and love, in proportions that are not always flattering to any of these qualities. He is selfish and lazy and capable of remarkable cruelty to the people who love him most. He is also, in his best moments, the kind of person who gives everything he has for the people who need him, who surprises you with the depth of the feeling that exists underneath the noise, who turns to face you in the middle of a disaster and says, without quite knowing how to say it, that you are the thing he has been trying to protect all along. He went to work at a plant that was slowly killing him because his family needed the health insurance. He came home every evening to a family he sometimes failed and always loved. He sat on a blue couch with his wife and his children and watched television and drank beer and was, for the duration of those evenings, everything he had ever wanted to be. If he is dreaming, the dream is this: the couch, the family, the evening that does not end. If the contamination is real, the love is real too. It exists alongside the damage. It persists through the damage. It is the thing that the contamination could not touch, the part of Homer that the radiation could not reach, the deepest thing in him and the clearest. Springfield is a broken place. Its air is bad and its water is contaminated and its billionaire is a monster, and its timeline refuses to move, and its geography refuses to cohere, and its collective memory refuses to hold the things it has witnessed. It is broken in ways that go all the way down, structural and ancient and self-sustaining. And in the middle of it, in a yellow house on a quiet street, a family sits together in the evening. The father has come home from the plant. The mother has made dinner. The boy is in some form of trouble. The girl is in her room, reading something too old for her, feeling something too large for the space available to her. And the baby is in the corner, watching everything, saying nothing, patient and aware in a way that none of them have earned the right to be. This is the family. This is every family. This is the American family and the English family and the family anywhere in the world where people come home to people they have chosen and sit together in the evening and try, imperfectly and repeatedly and without any guarantee of success, to love each other well enough. Springfield is broken. The family inside it persists. The loop turns. The timeline floats. The yellow house stays yellow and the blue couch stays blue, and Homer comes home, and the story continues because some stories are not designed to end. They are designed to continue, the way the things we love continue in us even after they are gone. The way a father's dream of his family continues in the dark of a hospital room. The way a show that began in 1989 is still running, still telling its story, still holding something up for us to see. Turn off the light if you have not already. Let the details settle. Springfield will be here when you come back to it. The plant on the horizon and the fish with 3 eyes and the oldest man in America glowing faintly in his mansion and the baby who has been watching for 37 years and still has not decided to speak. It will all be there. In the yellow house on the quiet street, where the family never changes and the evenings never end and the love, despite everything, despite the contamination and the coma and the denial and the damage, the love keeps finding its way home. It always does. Good night. End of script. Deeper into the contamination, every symptom, every detail. Let us go back to the beginning of the contamination theory and stay there a little longer, because the evidence is so dense and so specific and so thoroughly embedded in the show's fabric that a single pass through it does not do justice to what the writers have been quietly accumulating over 37 years. The first thing to establish is the timeline of the plant's documented failures, because the timeline matters. The plant has not been unsafe since a specific incident. It has been unsafe, continuously, chronically, across the entire run of the show, and the incidents have not decreased over time. If anything, they have increased, or have become more visible as the show has grown more willing to treat them as narrative material rather than mere background. In the earliest seasons, the plant was established as a presence and as a source of Homer's employment, but was not yet the subject of specific documented critique. The third season introduced the safety inspection storyline, the 342 violations, the $56 million remediation estimate that Burns refused to pay. This was the first moment when the show committed to a specific and damning portrait of the facility, and the commitment was total. 342 violations is not a number you arrive at through carelessness. That number was chosen to be enormous, to be undeniable, to be the kind of number that, in any real-world context, would have triggered immediate regulatory action and possibly criminal proceedings. Burns did not pay the fines. The violations were not corrected. The plant continued to operate. And in subsequent seasons, additional violations and incidents were added to the record with the casual frequency of a show that had decided to treat ongoing industrial catastrophe as a setting rather than a story. The luminous rats. This detail appears in an episode that uses it for comedy and then discards it, but within the contamination theory, it is enormously significant. Rodents whose biology has been so thoroughly altered by radiation that they produce visible light are not a background gag. They are evidence. They are exactly the kind of evidence that in any real regulatory context would trigger immediate closure of the facility and comprehensive environmental testing of the surrounding area. They are the Blinky of the mammalian world, proof that the contamination is not limited to the aquatic ecosystem, proof that the radiation has been penetrating the terrestrial environment around the plant with sufficient intensity to produce genetic mutation in warm-blooded animals. The show mentioned them once. Springfield absorbed the information. Nobody followed up. This is the contamination theory's central exhibit, the pattern of observation without consequence. The show shows you something alarming and then continues, and Springfield continues, and the alarm is absorbed by the ongoing normalcy of a town that has lost the capacity to be alarmed. The nuclear waste on the playground. This is one of the most disturbing details in the contamination theory's inventory, and it is also one of the most casually presented. At some point in the series, radioactive waste from the plant was dumped in or near a children's playground. The waste was glowing. The children were playing near it. The episode that contained this detail moved through it quickly, using it as part of a larger comedic context, and then moved on. Radioactive waste on a children's playground is not funny. It is not funny in the real world, and it should not be funny even in a cartoon world that has decided to treat nuclear contamination as comedy. But Springfield treats it as comedy because Springfield treats everything as comedy, including the things that are slowly killing it, and this is the denial machine in its purest operational form. The show shows you the catastrophe. The catastrophe is funny. You laugh. The catastrophe continues. You do not notice that you have just been shown something that should horrify you because you were too busy laughing at it. The waste on the playground is the clearest demonstration of what the contamination theory means when it says the show has been telling us this for 37 years. It is not hiding the contamination. It is showing you the contamination explicitly and relying on the comedic framing to ensure that the showing does not register as revelation. Now let us talk about the specific mechanism by which the contamination affects cognition. The contamination theories claim that long-term radiation exposure has degraded the cognitive function of Springfield's residents requires some elaboration because the claim is not simply that everyone in Springfield is stupid. Several of Springfield's residents are quite intelligent. Lisa is brilliant. Sideshow Bob is a genius. Even Burns, in his ancient and specific way, operates at a level of strategic sophistication that requires intact cognition. The contamination theory does not propose a blanket cognitive flattening. It proposes something more targeted. What radiation does, in the specific model the contamination theory employs, is disrupt the particular cognitive functions most associated with critical reasoning, long-term consequence assessment, and the ability to connect dispersed pieces of evidence into a coherent conclusion. These are the executive functions, the frontal lobe processes that allow people to say, I have noticed these patterns. These patterns suggest a cause. The cause has implications. I should act on those implications. Springfield's residents can observe. They can reason within a narrow frame. They can maintain the social and occupational functions of daily life. What they cannot do, in the contamination theory's model, is sustain the kind of extended critical reasoning that would allow them to say, the fish have 3 eyes, the plant has 342 violations, the sky above the cooling towers has a particular quality at certain times of day. Homer has gotten progressively less capable over the years of his employment there, and all of this adds up to something I need to name and address. Each observation is available. Each observation has been made by various characters in various episodes. What is consistently and conspicuously absent is the synthesis. Nobody connects the dots. And the contamination theory proposes that this is not a coincidence. The radiation has been calibrated, whether by accident or design, to degrade precisely the cognitive functions that would allow the town to connect its own dots. Burns's understanding of this is, the theory proposes, not accidental. A man who has been managing his own radiation exposure for over a century, who has first-hand knowledge of the specific neurological effects of different dosing levels, who has the resources to study those effects in controlled conditions, is a man who could, if he chose to, design a contamination profile that degrades critical cognition while preserving functional capacity. He needs his workers to be able to operate machinery. He needs his customers to be able to pay their electricity bills. He needs the town to function well enough to sustain itself as an economic unit. But he needs the town incapable of the specific reasoning that would lead to his accountability. The contamination, in this reading, is not a side effect of the plant's operation. It is one of the plant's products. This is the most disturbing version of the contamination theory. Not that Burns has been negligent and the contamination is the consequence of that negligence, but that Burns has been deliberately, thoughtfully, strategically contaminating his town at a level designed to produce a cognitively compliant population. The plant does not leak because Burns doesn't care about the leaks. The plant leaks because Burns wants it to leak, in exactly the ways it leaks, at exactly the levels it leaks, producing exactly the cognitive profile in the surrounding population that it produces. Springfield is not a company town in the ordinary sense of the phrase, where a single employer dominates the local economy. Springfield is a company town in a much more literal and much more sinister sense. Burns does not just employ the town. He has engineered the town, at the biological level, to be the kind of town that cannot resist him. And the show has been telling you this since the first season. Not through exposition, not through a villainous speech in which Burns explains his strategy. Through the accumulation of details, each one available to be seen, each one absorbed by the comedic framing, each one adding to a portrait that is only disturbing when you step back far enough to see the whole thing at once. Blinky the three-eyed fish is the portrait in miniature. He is what the contamination does to a living thing. He is the evidence the show has been placing in your field of vision since the very beginning, waiting for someone to look at him long enough to understand what they are seeing. Deeper into the coma, the structure of the dream. The coma theory's most powerful aspect is not its explanation of why the show changed after 1993. It is its explanation of how the show is structured. Because if you accept that every episode since April 1993 is Homer's dream, then the specific structure of individual episodes, the way they begin and develop and resolve, becomes meaningful in a way it cannot be if you treat the show as conventional television. Dreams have a specific architecture. They begin in medias res, without the establishment of context that waking narratives require. They proceed through associative logic rather than causal logic, which means events follow each other not because one causes the next, but because one reminds the dreaming mind of the next. They are populated by people who are both themselves and versions of themselves, who do things that are characteristic of them but at a scale or frequency or intensity that waking life would not permit. And they resolve not through narrative logic but through the requirements of the dreaming mind at a given moment, sometimes with wish fulfillment, sometimes with anxiety discharge, sometimes with nothing at all, simply stopping when the mind moves on. Apply this structure to The Simpsons after 1993. The plots of individual episodes proceed through associative logic. Homer's job as a food critic leads through a chain of events that is internally coherent but causally improbable, to Homer's food criticism threatening the livelihood of a beloved local restaurant. This is dream logic. Each step follows the previous step not because it must, but because it might, because the dreaming mind has moved in this direction and the dream follows. The resolution of the episode, in which the conflict is resolved and everything returns to normal, is the dream moving on, finding a new starting point for the next night's journey. The celebrity appearances follow the same pattern. In waking life, the question of why a famous musician or athlete or politician would be in Springfield is a question that requires a narrative answer. In dream logic, it requires no answer at all. The famous person appears because the dreaming mind has heard that person's voice or seen their image or absorbed their presence from the ambient media environment of the hospital room, and has incorporated them into the dream with the casual ease with which dreams incorporate everything. They are there because Homer dreamed them there. The logic of their presence is the logic of memory and association, not the logic of geography or probability. This reframes the entire category of later season Simpsons episodes that have been most criticized by fans. The episodes that feel most disconnected from the show's earlier emotional grounding. The episodes that feel most like the writers are throwing things at a wall to see what sticks. The episodes that feel, to use the phrase that has been applied to them most often, like the writers stopped caring. The coma theory says, they did not stop caring. The dreaming mind does not stop caring. But the dreaming mind becomes less coherent as the coma deepens, and the episodes that seem most random and disconnected are the episodes from the phases of the dream when Homer's brain was under the most stress, when the neurological damage was most acute, when the machinery of the dream was working hardest to maintain something recognizable from material that was becoming increasingly fragmented. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are particularly significant in this reading. They are explicitly framed as non-canonical, as stories that do not count within the continuity of the show, and they are, without exception, darker than the show's normal register. They deal with death, with violence, with body horror, with the destruction of the family and the town that the rest of the show is dedicated to preserving. In the coma theory, the Treehouse of Horror episodes are the nightmare portions of Homer's dream. They are the moments when the dreaming mind's maintenance of the family-preserving fiction falters, when the anxiety that the fiction is meant to contain breaks through, when the part of Homer's unconscious that knows he is in a hospital bed, and that his children are growing up without him, and that his wife is sitting in a waiting room somewhere, getting older produces a version of his family's world in which bad things happen to them. The horror of these episodes, from Homer's perspective, is the horror of the thing he is most afraid of. That the dream might be interrupted, that the fiction might end, that he might have to face what is actually happening, and then the episode ends. And in the next episode, everything is back to normal. The family is intact, the damage is undone. The horror was a dream within the dream, and the dream within the dream is over, and the larger dream reasserts itself with the desperate normality of a mind that needs things to be okay. This is the architecture of the coma. Not chaos, not creative exhaustion, not writers who stopped caring. It is the architecture of love, expressed in the only way available to an unconscious mind, the endless, recursive, imperfect, beautiful dream of a family that stays together. Deeper into Burns, the century of strategy. We have established that Burns is very old and that he is kept alive by weekly radiation treatments and that his body contains every known disease in a state of delicate equilibrium. But the Burns immortality theory, fully developed, is about more than biology. It is about the relationship between longevity and power, and about what a man who has been operating at the highest levels of American economic life for over a century has been able to accumulate and protect and deploy. Burns's wealth, as depicted in the show, is not the kind of wealth that can be explained by conventional investment returns. If you start with even a substantial fortune in the 1880s and manage it without losses through the financial panics, the two world wars, the Great Depression, the various recessions and corrections and upheavals of the 20th century, you can accumulate significant wealth through ordinary means. But the kind of wealth Burns has accumulated, the billionaire many times over that the show describes, requires something more than ordinary investment management. It requires the kind of sustained, active intervention in the mechanisms of wealth generation that only a person who has been paying attention for over a century can deploy. Burns has watched every major economic development of the modern era from the inside. He was present at the formation of the institutions that shape the American economy. He was there when the regulatory frameworks that govern those institutions were being written, which means he was there to ensure that the frameworks were written to accommodate his specific interests. He has had decades in each era to identify which emerging industries would dominate the next era and to position himself to profit from those industries before their dominance became visible to anyone without his historical vantage point. He has also had over a century to identify and neutralize threats. The show has established that Burns's political influence extends to the highest levels of federal government. He has had presidents do his bidding. He has had regulatory agencies redirected to serve his interests. He has had investigations suppressed, documents sealed, witnesses discredited or simply bought. The apparatus of institutional corruption that Burns commands is not just the result of his current wealth. It is the accumulated investment of decades, possibly of a century, in the systematic identification and purchase of the specific humans who occupy the specific positions that could threaten him. This is the Burns immortality theory's most sobering proposition. Not that Burns has cheated death through an unusual biology, but that he has cheated accountability through an unusually comprehensive and long-term investment in the mechanisms by which accountability is administered. He has had time, more time than any of his potential adversaries, to map the entire system and identify every point at which it could be used against him, and to ensure that each of those points is controlled by someone he has purchased. The result is a man who cannot be touched, not because he has supernatural protection or divine favor, but because he has spent more than a century building a system that ensures his protection, and the system works, and the evidence of its working is the simple fact of his continued existence and continued operation. Springfield is the clearest demonstration of this. The contamination should have destroyed Burns decades ago. The violations should have triggered enforcement action that would have shut the plant and held Burns criminally liable. The evidence of what has been done to the town's population, the yellowing, the cognitive degradation, the three-eyed fish, should have been sufficient to support a negligence case of historic proportions. None of this happened. None of it will happen. Not because the evidence is insufficient, but because every agency, every court, every official who could have used that evidence has been either neutralized or acquired by the same apparatus of institutional corruption that Burns has been building since before any of them were born. This is the final horror of the Burns immortality theory. It is not that he has lived too long. It is that he has built a world in which his living too long has no consequences, in which the thing he has done to Springfield and to the Simpsons and to Mona and to Homer's childhood and to the fish in the river and to the children on the playground is simply absorbed by a system designed to absorb it, in which the only thing that will ever end Burns is the failure of his body, which he is managing with everything his century of accumulated wealth can provide. He will probably outlive Springfield. He will probably outlive the show. He will probably be there, glowing faintly, in whatever form Springfield eventually takes when the loop finally stops, which is to say he will probably be there forever, because the loop does not stop and Burns does not die, and the system he built is designed to ensure that both of these things remain true for as long as physics permits. Deeper into the denial machine, Springfield's long history of forgetting, the principal and the pauper gave us the denial machine made visible. But the denial machine has been operating in Springfield for much longer than that episode, and its operations are visible in dozens of episodes if you know what to look for. The most systematic of Springfield's forgetting is what fans sometimes call the reset button, the mechanism by which every episode ends with the status quo restored and every subsequent episode begins from a baseline that ignores the previous episode's events. This is, on one level, standard episodic television production, the formatting convention that allows episodes to be watched in any order and that ensures the show does not have to deal with the cumulative consequences of its own plots. Most long-running television employs some version of this convention, but The Simpsons has been particularly aggressive and particularly deliberate about its resets, and the contamination theory argues that the aggression and the deliberateness are themselves meaningful. The show does not merely reset between episodes. It frequently resets within the context of major events that the story logic demands should have lasting consequences. Homer saves the town. The town forgets he saved it. Homer nearly dies in an accident that would, in a realistic family drama, produce lasting emotional residue. The emotional residue is gone by the next episode. Marge and Homer come to a marital crisis that genuinely threatens the stability of their relationship. The crisis is resolved. By the next episode, the relationship is exactly as it was before the crisis. This is not just lazy writing, though it has sometimes been called that. It is the consistent, almost mechanical application of a narrative principle. Springfield forgets, always, completely, and immediately. The contamination theory connects this directly to the cognitive damage it proposes. A population with degraded executive function, with reduced capacity for sustained critical reasoning and long-term consequence assessment, is also a population with reduced episodic memory integration. The normal process by which individual events are connected to form a coherent, personal, and communal history depends on the same executive functions that the theory proposes have been degraded. A town that cannot connect its own dots cannot maintain its own history. Each event is experienced and then released, not because the experience was unimportant, but because the neural machinery that would normally encode it into long-term communal memory has been compromised. Springfield forgets because it literally cannot remember, not from malice or willful ignorance, but from neurological damage that makes the integration of new information into existing frameworks unreliable. Each episode begins from baseline because the town's collective memory cannot sustain anything more than baseline. This is different from the denial machine, and it is important to distinguish them. The denial machine is the active, chosen suppression of uncomfortable truths. The forgetting is the passive consequence of cognitive damage. Both operate in Springfield simultaneously. The town sometimes forgets because it cannot remember, and it sometimes forgets because it has chosen to forget, and the contamination theory proposes that the two processes reinforce each other. The cognitive damage makes the community more vulnerable to the denial machine's operations, because a population that already has difficulty integrating new information is easier to redirect when it has integrated something the denial machine once suppressed. You do not have to work as hard to make a damaged mind forget as you would have to work to make an intact one. Burns runs both systems. The contamination produces the cognitive damage that makes the forgetting easy. The denial machine, which Burns has built and maintained through his political influence and his economic power, handles the cases where the forgetting needs to be directed rather than simply allowed to occur. The result is a town that has experienced dozens of catastrophes and remembers none of them clearly. A town that has been dominated by a billionaire for decades without ever quite connecting its own diminishment to his enrichment. A town that has watched its fish grow extra eyes, and its workers grow more confused, and its children born yellow, and its sky darken with the product of an industrial process it cannot regulate, and that has, in the face of all of this, maintained its fundamental cheerfulness, its Friday night normalcy, its sense that things are more or less fine even as everything around it suggests they are very much not. This is the final purpose of the denial machine. Not to prevent the discovery of the truth. The truth is everywhere in Springfield. It is visible in the fish and in the skin and in the eyes of the people. The purpose of the denial machine is to ensure that the visible truth never becomes actionable knowledge, that the observation never becomes the synthesis, that the individual pieces of evidence never assemble themselves into the picture they form. Springfield knows what has been done to it. Springfield has always known, in the fragmented, unassembled way that a damaged mind knows things. The denial machine's job is to ensure that the fragments never come together, to ensure that the knowing remains incomplete, that the truth remains in pieces, that the picture is always almost visible but never quite seen. Burns has been doing this for over a century. He is very good at it. Deeper into Maggie, the 37-year silence. We have established that Maggie Simpson is probably not a normal baby and that her silence is probably not a developmental feature. But we have not yet fully explored what 37 years of strategic silence looks like from the inside, or what it tells us about who Maggie is becoming inside the performance of infancy that she has been sustaining since the show began. Consider the specific situations in which Maggie's intelligence surfaces. They are almost always situations involving direct threat to her family or to beings she has decided to protect. The shooting of Mr. Burns, whatever its true circumstances, happened immediately after Burns attempted to harm her by taking her property. The butterfly rescue in the longest daycare was undertaken on behalf of a creature that could not protect itself. The various episodes in which Maggie saves Homer involve Homer being in genuine danger from forces that his own incapacity prevents him from dealing with. The pattern is not random. Maggie surfaces when something she loves is threatened. The rest of the time she is submerged, performing the infancy that keeps her safe from the visibility that destroyed Lisa's childhood. She has, over 37 years of careful observation, identified the specific conditions under which her intelligence can be deployed without triggering the kind of attention that would compromise her strategy, and she has restricted her activity to those conditions. This is a form of discipline that most adults cannot maintain. The average person, even one with excellent impulse control and a sophisticated understanding of strategy, occasionally lets their intelligence show when it would be more prudent to conceal it. They answer a question too quickly, reveal a knowledge they were not supposed to have, make a connection in a moment of enthusiasm that they immediately regret. Maggie has not done this in 37 years. She has maintained total operational security across the entire run of the show, in every episode, in every situation, without a single lapse that has been documented in the main continuity. This is not baby behavior. This is the behavior of a professional. The question that the Maggie theory eventually arrives at is not whether she is intelligent, or strategic, or capable. These are established. The question is what she is waiting for. What is the threshold? What is the condition under which Maggie Simpson, who has been watching Springfield for 37 years with the patient attention of someone who understands exactly what she is looking at, will decide to stop watching and start acting in a way that cannot be dismissed as baby behavior or lucky accident? The coma theory offers one answer. In Homer's dream, Maggie is preserved in the state he knew her in, which is the state of pure potential, the open future before any choice has closed off any possibility. She cannot decide to speak because the dream needs her to remain possible. If she spoke, if she revealed herself fully, the dream would have to reckon with who she actually is and what that means for the story it is telling. The dream is not ready for that. Homer is not ready for that. And so she waits, frozen in her corner, watching the most capable person in Springfield and also, in the logic of the dream, the least free. The contamination theory offers a different answer. In the contamination theory's model of Springfield, in which the radiation has had amplifying effects on Maggie's developing brain, what Maggie is waiting for is the right moment to apply what she knows in a way that will matter. She has spent 37 years accumulating information. She has watched the contamination, the coma, the denial machine, Burns, Ned, the floating timeline, all of it. She understands what Springfield is in a way that no other character does, because she has the intelligence to synthesize what she has observed and the patience to wait until the synthesis becomes actionable. She is waiting for her moment. This is the most patient long game in television history. A character introduced in 1989 who has been, for 37 years, in the process of becoming something the show has not yet revealed. Who contains, within her silence, the potential answer to questions the show has been asking since its first episode. Who is, in the contamination theory's reading, the one person in Springfield with the intelligence and the patience and the strategic sophistication to actually challenge the arrangement that Burns has built? If and when Maggie speaks, what she says will matter. Whatever she has been building toward in 37 years of watching will be expressed in her first real, deliberate, visible declaration of who she is and what she knows and what she intends to do with it. Springfield will not see it coming. That is the whole point. the matter of Homer's heart. We have spent a great deal of time in this video on what has been done to Homer, the contamination that has degraded his cognition, the absence of his mother and what it did to his emotional development, the deal his grandfather made that locked him into the facility that was harming him, the coma that may be the frame within which all of this exists, the ways in which the system built by Burns has used Homer's particular combination of damage and love as a reliable source of compliant labor. But we have not spent enough time on what Homer has done in spite of all of this, and we should, because the Homer story is not only a story about damage, it is also a story about love that survives damage, and that survival is the show's most important and least acknowledged argument. Homer Simpson has had his cognition degraded by nuclear radiation. He has had his emotional development disrupted by the childhood loss of his mother, a loss that was not a natural loss, but a deliberate injury inflicted by the man he would spend his adult life working for. He has lived in a contaminated environment, worked in a contaminated facility, had a crayon pushed into his brain by the particular physics of a childhood accident, and has arrived at middle age as a man whose measured IQ is 55 and whose measured capacity for critical reasoning is negligible by any standard assessment. And he loves his family with a depth and a consistency and an inarticulate but genuine passion that, in the show's best episodes, is absolutely devastatingly beautiful. This is not an accident. This is not a coincidence. The show has understood from its beginning that the capacity for love is not the same as the capacity for intelligence, and that the two can coexist in the same person in wildly unequal proportions, without the lesser diminishing the greater. Homer is not a good thinker. Homer is not a reliable person. Homer is not the kind of father a child would choose, given a full range of options, if the criterion were competence rather than love. But Homer loves his children in a way that is complete, that is not contingent on their accomplishments or their behavior or their ability to reflect credit back on him, that is simply and totally and without reservation aimed at them as they are, as they actually are, as the specific and imperfect people they happen to be. This is the love the coma theory says he is dreaming. This is the love the contamination theory says survived the radiation. This is the love the denial machine theory says provides the emotional foundation that makes Springfield's collective forgetting bearable rather than simply terrible. Without the love, the contamination is just a story about industrial negligence. Without the love, the coma is just a tragedy about brain damage. Without the love, the denial machine is just an indictment of human moral failure. The love is what makes Springfield livable. The love is what makes the show watchable. The love is what made 37 years of a cartoon about a yellow family seem, to hundreds of millions of people across multiple generations, like something worth caring about. Homer Simpson has been given every reason not to love. His environment damaged his capacity for clear thought. His childhood was defined by absence and grief. The system he lives within was designed by a man who benefits from Homer's incapacity and who has invested in maintaining that incapacity. The deck has been stacked against Homer's humanity at every level by every force in his environment. He loves anyway. He loves imperfectly, inconsistently, sometimes destructively, often at the wrong time and in the wrong way. But he loves. And the love persists across 37 years and hundreds of episodes, and the entire trajectory of a show that has become, in its long, middle, and later seasons, considerably more interested in comedy than in the emotional precision that characterized its earliest work. The love is always there. It surfaces when the show needs it to, in the moments when the comedy pauses and the family dynamics resolve briefly into something that looks like the truth. Homer looking at his sleeping daughter. Homer standing at the hospital window when Bart was born. Homer and Marge dancing in the kitchen at midnight when they think no one is watching. These moments are the show's argument, not the contamination, and not the coma, and not the denial machine, and not any of the theories we have discussed tonight. The show's argument is these moments. The argument is that love survives damage. The argument is that the worst that can be done to a person by their environment and their history and the people who should have protected them but didn't is not sufficient to extinguish the capacity for love, if the love is rooted deeply enough. Homer's love is rooted in something that the contamination cannot reach, and the coma cannot distort, and the denial machine cannot suppress. It is the foundational thing, the thing he was before everything that was done to him, the thing he will remain when all the damage is accounted for. This is why we keep watching. Not for the theories, not for the mystery of who shot Burns or the question of whether Homer is dreaming. For this, for the man on the couch, beer in hand, surrounded by the family he loves inadequately and completely, in the yellow house at the end of the quiet street in the town that does not appear on any map. For the thing that survives. For the thing that always, always survives. The show that will not end. The Simpsons has been on the air since the 17th of December, 1989. It is the longest-running scripted primetime show in American television history. It has outlasted the cultural moments that gave rise to it, the specific anxieties of the late 1980s about the American family, the Reagan-era's effect on working-class life, the particular quality of American television in the years before the medium's prestige transformation. It has outlasted several of the celebrities who appeared in it. It has outlasted critical consensus, which declared it brilliant, then declared it finished, then declared it a pale shadow, then stopped declaring anything about it with much energy and simply accepted its persistence as a fact of American life. The show will not end, not anytime soon. It has been renewed through seasons that would have seemed absurd to anyone in 1989 who was asked how long it would run. It has accumulated enough episodes to fill a continuous broadcast that would last more than 2 weeks without repeating. It has become, in the most literal possible sense, a permanent institution. The coma theory offers one explanation for this. Homer's dream does not end because Homer has not ended. His body is in the hospital. His brain is generating the dream. The dream is the show. The show ends when Homer ends, and Homer has not ended, and so the show continues and will continue until the moment, which the show will never depict because the show cannot depict its own ending, when Homer finally makes whatever decision concludes his story. The denial machine theory offers another explanation. The show does not end because Springfield cannot allow itself to end. The loop is the town's survival mechanism. The ongoing present tense is the community's defense against the consequences that would arrive if time were ever allowed to genuinely pass. The show continues because Springfield has decided, collectively, that it will continue, and nothing in Springfield has ever been capable of overriding a collective decision of that kind once it has been made. But there is a third explanation, simpler than both of these, and it is the explanation that the show's audience provides by watching it. The show does not end because we will not let it end. We have been watching since 1989, those of us who were there. We have grown up. Our children have grown up watching the same family that was already on television when we were children. The show has been a constant in a world that has not been constant, a fixed point in a landscape of perpetual change, a place that is always the same when we return to it, regardless of what has happened in the world outside. We need the show not to end because its ending would be an acknowledgement that some things that feel permanent are actually temporary, and we are not ready for that acknowledgement. We know, in the abstract, that the show will eventually end. We know that the number 37, currently accurate as a description of the show's age, will eventually become 38 and 39 and 40. We know that the characters are locked in amber, and that the amber will eventually be broken, that the loop will eventually be interrupted, that the timeline will eventually have to land somewhere. We know this. We prefer not to think about it. We prefer, instead, to think about the yellow house and the blue couch, and the family that never ages, and the episodes that keep arriving, and the jokes that we have heard enough times to recite by heart and have never stopped finding funny. This is the audience's version of the denial machine. We are Springfield. We have been Springfield since the first episode aired. We have absorbed the contamination of 37 years of this particular vision of American life, and it has changed us in ways we are barely equipped to articulate, and we prefer the dream to the waking because the dream is warmer. Homer is dreaming on his hospital bed. We are dreaming in our living rooms. And the dream, for both of us, is the same. A family together in the evening, in a house that belongs to them, with enough food and enough warmth and enough love to get through to tomorrow. It is a small dream. It is also everything. Springfield will be there when you wake up. It always is. End of script. The episodes that changed everything. A deeper reading of the series' turning points. There are specific episodes in the run of The Simpsons that function as fault lines. Before them, the show is one thing. After them, it is another. Most conversations about these episodes treat them as evidence of creative decisions, of the writers choosing to go in one direction rather than another. The contamination theory and its companion theories read them differently. They read them as symptoms, as the moments when the larger forces operating on Springfield became visible through the thin surface of the comedy. Let us begin with You Only Move Twice, from the 8th season, which is widely regarded as one of the best episodes the show ever produced and which is, on closer examination, one of the most revealing. The premise is simple. Homer is recruited by a charismatic, competent, genuinely warm employer named Hank Scorpio, who offers him a dream position at a facility called Cypress Creek. The family relocates. Homer thrives. He is good at his job for the first time in his professional life. His employer likes him, remembers his name, gives him genuine encouragement and autonomy. The new environment is beautiful, and the house is superior to Evergreen Terrace. And everything about the move seems like the thing Homer has always needed, to be somewhere that recognizes his potential and gives him the conditions to fulfill it. And then it emerges, gradually, that Hank Scorpio is a Bond villain. He is in the process of holding the eastern United States to ransom. The Cypress Creek facility is a front for a global terrorist operation. Homer's excellent job performance, which has been a source of genuine pride and genuine competence, has been in direct service of an enormous international crime. The episode ends with Scorpio providing Homer with a parting gift. Homer's dream, which Homer had mentioned casually, was to own the Dallas Cowboys. Scorpio delivers the Denver Broncos, which is not the Dallas Cowboys, and Homer returns to Springfield with an NFL team and without his dream job and without the competence he briefly discovered he possessed. Most readings of this episode focus on its comedy, which is extraordinary, and on its observation about Homer's tendency toward myopia, his inability to notice the larger context in which his specific happiness is embedded. Homer was happy at Cypress Creek because he was looking only at his own experience and not at the world around him. The contamination theory reads the episode as a direct statement about Homer's situation at the Springfield nuclear power plant. Scorpio is not merely a comic exaggeration of a good employer who turns out to be a villain. He is the explicit contrast to Burns, the demonstration of what Homer's working life could look like if it were administered by someone who genuinely valued him. Homer is good at his Cypress Creek job because the job is organized around his strengths and his employer wants him to succeed. He is bad at his Springfield job because the job is organized around the maintenance of a contaminating facility by someone who benefits from Homer's incapacity. The episode shows you exactly how Homer works when the conditions are right. Then it sends him back to the conditions that are wrong. And the reason it sends him back, the narrative logic of the return, is that the family was unhappy in Cypress Creek. Marge couldn't find her purpose. Bart needed remedial education. Lisa had an allergic reaction. The family could not thrive there, even though Homer could, because the family belongs to Springfield in ways that have nothing to do with Springfield's quality as an environment. Springfield has its hooks in them. The contamination, the coma, the denial machine, whatever the mechanism, the Simpsons are Springfield's and Springfield knows it, and the episode's return is the most honest depiction of this in the series. Homer was better elsewhere and he came back anyway because coming back is what the system requires. Now let us look at Homer's enemy, from the same 8th season, which is the episode that asked the question the show had been avoiding since its inception and then answered it in a way that has disturbed viewers for nearly 3 decades. The premise: a new employee arrives at the plant. His name is Frank Grimes. He is, in contrast to Homer, a man who has achieved everything through effort and suffering, who grew up poor, who was injured in a silo explosion at age 18, who put himself through electrical engineering school, who has every credential that Homer lacks, and who has earned every credential through the kind of sustained, costly effort that Homer has never once made. Grimes is, in the language of meritocracy, the correct person to have Homer's job. He is the person who should be the safety inspector at this facility. He has the knowledge and the competence and the dedication. Homer has none of these things. And, from the moment Grimes arrives at the plant, he is confronted, episode by episode, with the evidence that Homer is not just unqualified, but actively and obviously unqualified, and that this unqualification has not prevented Homer from living a comfortable and largely enjoyable life. The episode does not find this funny. It asks you to sit with it, to look at it clearly without the comedic buffer that usually surrounds Homer's incompetence. Grimes looks at Homer's house, at his family, at his personal warmth and his social connections and his inexplicable good fortune, and he asks the question, why does this man have this life? By what justice does a man with a 55 IQ, who has caused dozens of containment incidents, who cannot be trusted with the most basic functions of his job, who has achieved nothing through any deliberate effort, have the life that Frank Grimes has been working toward and has not achieved? The episode's answer is disturbing. It offers no answer. Homer has this life because he has this life. There is no why. There is no justice. The merit system that Grimes has organized his entire existence around does not operate in Springfield, possibly does not operate anywhere, and the realization of this breaks him. At the episode's climax, Grimes snaps, begins mimicking Homer's behavior, reaches for live wires while shouting that he does not need safety gloves because he is Homer Simpson and is electrocuted. He dies. Homer falls asleep at his funeral and the congregation laughs. Homer's enemy is the most brutal thing the series has ever done. It took the comedic premise of Homer's dysfunction and held it up to the light long enough to show what it actually looks like. A world in which competence is irrelevant, in which the system that rewards merit is a fiction, in which a man can be catastrophically bad at his job for his entire career and accumulate nothing but warmth and love and a comfortable life, while a man who does everything right dies having achieved nothing he worked for. The contamination theory reads this as Burns's system fully expressed. Grimes represents the threat that someone with intact cognition and genuine professional standards poses to the arrangement at the plant. A competent safety inspector would not survive at the Springfield nuclear power plant. The plant would have to change to accommodate him, which it cannot do without revealing what it is and what it has done. So the system eliminates him. Not through conspiracy, not through Burns ordering his removal, but through the grinding pressure of a reality organized around Homer's incapacity, which Grimes cannot adapt to because he has not been damaged the way Springfield's residents have been damaged. His intact mind is what kills him. He can see too clearly. He cannot stop seeing. And seeing clearly in Springfield is the most dangerous condition available. Homer sleeps through the funeral. The congregation laughs. And Springfield continues, as it always continues, as it was designed to continue, maintained by the ongoing operation of the system that keeps Homer at his console and Grimes in the ground. Now let us turn to Lisa's Substitute from the second season, which is perhaps the most emotionally precise episode in the show's entire run, and which the contamination theory reads as the show's clearest early statement about what intelligence costs in Springfield. A substitute teacher named Mr. Bergstrom arrives in Lisa's class. He is brilliant, gentle, emotionally intelligent, attentive to the specific quality of Lisa's mind in a way that nobody, not even Homer, has managed to be. He treats her as an intellectual equal. He engages with her curiosity directly rather than managing it. He makes her feel, for a few days, that the thing she is, the particular kind of brilliant and lonely and passionately caring person she is not a problem to be managed but a treasure to be recognized. He leaves. He is a substitute, which means he was never staying. His departure sends Lisa into a grief that the episode does not undercut with comedy, that it treats with complete seriousness as the actual loss it is. And before he leaves, he gives her a note. She opens it later. It contains one sentence. "You are Lisa Simpson." This is the episode's argument in 5 words. Not, "You will find your place." Not, "Things will get better." Not any of the comfortable reassurances that adults offer to children who are suffering because the world around them is too small for what they contain. Just, "You are Lisa Simpson. You know who you are." That knowledge is the thing nobody can take from you. It is enough. The contamination theory reads this as the most important statement the show has ever made about what intelligence costs in Springfield. Lisa is brilliant. Being brilliant in Springfield means being alone. Being alone means needing someone to tell you that your aloneness is not a failure, but a consequence of being too good for the available company. Mr. Bergstrom is that someone, briefly. His departure is the departure of the last person in the room who could see her. What remains after he goes is what has always been there. Springfield, which does not know what to do with her, and Homer, who loves her without being able to see her, and the life she will live in a town too contaminated to produce the kind of person she deserves to be surrounded by. She is Lisa Simpson. She is stuck in Springfield. And the note in her pocket is both the most loving thing the show has ever given her and the quietest acknowledgement that it is not enough. The Treehouse of Horror, Springfield's Nightmare Atlas. Every year, The Simpsons produces a Treehouse of Horror episode. These episodes are explicitly framed as non-canonical, as horror and science fiction parodies that do not occur within the show's regular continuity and that cannot be used as evidence about the characters' established histories or futures. Characters die in these episodes. The laws of physics are suspended. The family encounters monsters and aliens and supernatural forces that, in the regular continuity, do not exist. The coma theory has a specific and detailed reading of what these episodes are. In the coma theory's framework, the Treehouse of Horror episodes are the nightmare phases of Homer's dream. They are the moments when the dreaming mind's maintenance of the comfortable fiction, the family together in the yellow house, the evenings that never end, the children who never age, is disrupted by the anxieties that the fiction is constructed to suppress. In the nightmare phases, the things Homer is most afraid of are allowed to be expressed directly. The death of his family, the dissolution of his home, the arrival of forces too powerful for his love to protect against. The horror of the Treehouse episodes, the specific quality of the fear they generate even in the context of comedy and parody, comes from this. They are not simply scary stories. They are the specific fears of a specific dreaming mind, expressed in the amplified and distorted form that dreams give to the things they process. Homer's children are threatened. Homer's wife is taken. Homer's home is destroyed. The things he loves most are subjected to exactly the kind of harm that his dreaming mind spends the rest of the year protecting them from. And every Treehouse episode ends, and every subsequent regular episode begins from baseline, and the harm is undone, and the family is intact, and the dream reasserts itself. This is the dream's most important move. Not the nightmare, but the recovery from the nightmare, the return to the yellow house, the restoration of the equilibrium, the demonstration that the dreaming mind is still capable, even after the nightmare, of reconstructing the thing it is dreaming. Each Treehouse episode is a test. The nightmare dismantles the dream. The regular season that follows reassembles it. Homer's unconscious proves, year after year, that it can take the worst the nightmare can do and return to the place it needs to be. The family survives, not because nothing bad happens to them, but because the dreaming mind that generates them is committed to their survival regardless of what happens. This is the show's deepest structure, in the coma theory's reading. Not the individual plots, not the individual episodes. The annual cycle of nightmare and recovery, of the dream threatened and the dream rebuilt, of the worst case imagined and then survived. 37 years of this cycle. 37 years of Homer's unconscious mind proving that it can hold on to the thing it loves most, even when the nightmare tries to take it. The Treehouse episodes are not interruptions in the show's main story. They are the show's main story told in its most honest register. The rest of the year is the version of the story the dreaming mind wants to be true. The Treehouse episodes are the version it is afraid might be true. And the fact that every nightmare is followed by a return to the yellow house is the dreaming mind's answer to its own fear. Yes, the worst could happen. Yes, I know. And I am building the dream again anyway. Every year. Every single year. This is what love looks like from the inside of a coma. Barney Gumble and the tragedy of potential. The contamination theory has its most detailed application to Homer Simpson, but Homer is not the only Springfield resident whose life reveals the full weight of what the plant has done. Barney Gumble is, in many ways, a more complete demonstration of the contamination's effects than Homer, because Barney's story contains an element that Homer's does not, a clear before and after. We know what Homer was like before the plant damaged him only through implication, through the crater left by his cognitive degradation, through the handful of episodes that show us flashes of the intelligence that exists beneath the interference. But we have seen Barney before. In several flashback episodes, the show reveals that Barney Gumble was, in his youth, not the person he is now. He was a high-achieving student. His grades were excellent. His aspirations were significant. He had applied to and been accepted by a prestigious university. He had, in the most concrete possible terms, a future that the Barney we know at the Moe's Tavern stool has entirely and irreversibly forfeited. The night Homer introduced Barney to beer changed everything. This is the official story, and the show depicts it as the comedic origin of Barney's condition. One beer led to another, led to 30 years of continuous alcoholism, led to the person we see now. Homer gave Barney beer. Homer is responsible for what Barney became. But the contamination theory notes that the official story is incomplete. The question is not just why Barney started drinking. The question is why he could not stop. Why 30 years of increasingly obvious self-destruction did not produce the kind of motivated recovery that people with intact cognitive executive function are capable of. Why the intelligence that was visible in young Barney, the intelligence that earned him university admission, the intelligence that suggested a future of genuine possibility, was apparently unable to assert itself against the pull of addiction. People with intact frontal lobe function, with full access to their executive capacities, their long-term consequence assessment, their ability to connect present behavior to future outcomes, do recover from alcoholism. It is never easy. It is often the hardest thing a person does in their life. But it is possible, and it happens. And it happens precisely because the executive functions, if intact, are eventually capable of making the connection between the current trajectory and where that trajectory leads, and of mobilizing the person's will around changing the trajectory. Barney has never done this. Or rather, Barney did this once, in a later season episode in which he achieves sobriety and begins to develop the life that the young Barney was promised. And then the sobriety storyline was quietly set aside in subsequent episodes, and Barney returned to the bar stool, and the recovery was absorbed by the reset, the way everything in Springfield is absorbed by the reset. The contamination theory reads this as follows. Barney's alcoholism is not simply the consequence of Homer's introduction of beer to a susceptible personality. It is the consequence of a susceptible personality meeting a cognitive environment that has been systematically degraded by radiation. The executive functions that would normally allow Barney to mount a sustainable recovery have been compromised by the same contamination that compromised Homer's capacity for critical reasoning. Barney can see, in the moments of his sobriety, that his life is not what it should be. He cannot sustain the vision long enough to act on it effectively because his cognitive architecture cannot sustain that kind of long-term motivated reasoning in the contaminated environment of Springfield. The recovery episode is not a story about Barney's resilience. It is a story about what Barney could have been, shown briefly, before the reset takes it back. The show gives him the life he might have had for one episode and then returns him to the bar. This is Springfield's ritual cruelty, the demonstration of the possible, followed by the reassertion of the actual. Barney knows what he lost. There are moments in the show, moments that are played for laughs but that exist in the space between the comedy and something much harder, when Barney's awareness of the gap between what he is and what he might have been is visible, the cello he once played, the ambitions he once had, the particular intelligence that earned him a university admission and that now surfaces occasionally in strange moments, in observations that are too sharp for the character the show has decided he is. He is what the contamination does when it has more time to work, or when it encounters a particular vulnerability that allows it to work more thoroughly. He is Homer extended, Homer without the family and the love that give Homer's damaged life its shape and its point. He is what happens when the damage is not held in place by something worth holding on to. He is at the bar stool. He has been at the bar stool for 37 years. He will be at the bar stool when the show ends, if the show ends, which it may not, which is itself part of the story. Sideshow, Bob, and the exception that proves the rule. If the contamination theory's central claim is that Springfield's residents have been cognitively degraded by radiation in ways that prevent them from connecting the dots, from following evidence to conclusions, from sustaining the kind of critical reasoning that would allow them to challenge the arrangement, then Sideshow Bob is the most significant problem the theory faces. Sideshow Bob is not cognitively degraded. He is, by any measure, one of the most intelligent characters in the show's history. He has advanced academic credentials, demonstrated expertise across multiple demanding fields, and a strategic sophistication that has allowed him to survive and operate in circumstances that would defeat any merely competent person. He is not yellow in the standard Springfield way. His features are more angular, more distinctly drawn, less subsumed in the generic Springfield visual vocabulary. He was not born in Springfield. This matters. He arrived there. He came from outside the contamination zone and established himself within it, which means that whatever cognitive damage the radiation has produced in the native population, he entered the town with an intact nervous system and has had considerably less time to accumulate the damage. The contamination theory proposes that the most significant effects of chronic low-level radiation exposure are on developmental cognition and on the specific executive functions that require sustained investment over years to build. Someone who arrives in Springfield as an adult with an already formed brain suffers less than someone who grew up there. But Sideshow Bob also represents something beyond this. He is, in the contamination theory's reading, the specific kind of person the denial machine is designed to neutralize. He is someone who sees Springfield clearly, who understands its systems, who can articulate what it is and how it works in ways that the contaminated residents cannot. And the town responds to him consistently by incarcerating him, by treating his intelligence and his clarity as criminal, by making his very presence in Springfield a problem to be managed by the legal system. He keeps coming back. He escapes or is released, and he returns to Springfield, and Springfield responds by putting him back in prison. The loop with Sideshow Bob is a perfect mirror of the loop with the real Seymour Skinner. A person who refuses to fit the comfortable fiction gets expelled, returns, gets expelled again. The denial machine does not need a single exile if the person keeps coming back. It just needs to keep the rejection process running. Keep him behind bars. Keep him contained. Ensure that his intelligence and his clarity never reach critical mass, never accumulate to the point where they become something the town has to reckon with. There is a persistent reading of Sideshow Bob that focuses on his attempts to kill Bart Simpson as evidence of his villainy, and this is correct at the plot level. He has tried to kill Bart. He has harbored murderous intentions toward Bart for most of the show's run. This is bad. This is not the behavior of someone whose intelligence should be celebrated. But the contamination theory is interested in something else. It is interested in why the intelligence is aimed at Bart specifically, in what it would mean for someone as capable as Bob to direct his full attention toward the Simpson family, rather than toward, say, Burns. The theory proposes that the denial machine has been successful in the specific case of Bob. His intelligence has been captured and redirected toward an internal Springfield conflict that keeps him occupied and imprisoned, rather than directed at the actual sources of Springfield's suffering. Bob knows what is wrong with Springfield. He cannot bring himself to act on it. He is too invested in the personal, in the years-long vendetta against a single child, to step back and see the larger picture that his intelligence would, if properly directed, make visible. The denial machine has not degraded his cognition, it has distracted it. Given him a personal obsession large enough to absorb all the intelligence that might otherwise threaten the arrangement. This is more sophisticated than simply damaging the brain. This is keeping the dangerous mind busy with the wrong problem. Springfield's most capable resident, the one person who might be able to articulate what has happened to the town and why, and who is responsible, spends his time in and out of prison pursuing a grudge against a 10-year-old boy. The arrangement is safe. The Simpsons and the American Dream. What Springfield actually represents. The Simpsons premiered in December 1989. The Berlin Wall had fallen 6 weeks earlier. The Cold War was ending. The decade that followed was characterized, in its dominant cultural mood, by a specific American confidence. The sense that the right arrangement had been found, that the combination of liberal democracy and market capitalism represented the final answer to the question of how societies should organize themselves, that the future would be an extension of the present on a progressively improving trajectory. The Simpsons spent the next 37 years depicting what that arrangement actually looked like at the level of a working-class family in a mid-sized American town. Homer Simpson is the American Dream subject. He is the person the American Dream was designed for: a working man, a father, a consumer, a participant in civic life, a person whose connection to the institutions around him, the employer, the school, the church, the government, is the connection the dream promises will produce a good life. He works hard enough. He pays his taxes. He votes, occasionally, with a certain amount of confusion about the mechanics. He sends his children to school. He goes to church on the holidays that require it. He participates, imperfectly but genuinely, in the social arrangements that the dream requires of him. And what has the dream given him in return? A job that is slowly killing him. A town that has been contaminated by the employer he depends on. A government that cannot or will not address the contamination because the contaminator owns the government. An education system that has failed one of his 3 children completely, adequately served a second, and cannot contain the third because the third is too intelligent for what Springfield offers. A religious institution that speaks directly to his neighbor and ignores him. A financial situation that is perpetually precarious. A body that is always about to break down in some new and expensive way. Homer has done everything the dream asked him to do. The dream has not delivered what it promised. This is not a political statement in the way that phrase often functions, as a critique from one ideological position aimed at another. It is a description. The Simpsons, for 37 years, has been describing the gap between what the dream promises and what it delivers, and the description has been so consistent and so specific and so accurate that it has become, as we discussed in the section on predictions, a kind of documentary record of American life in the late 20th and early 21st centuries. The contamination is the gap made physical. Burns is the gap made personal. The denial machine is the cultural apparatus that maintains the gap's invisibility. And Homer, going to work every morning, coming home every evening, sitting down on the couch with his family, is the person the gap is doing its work on? The person in whose body and life the distance between the promise and the reality is being measured. He does not blame the dream. He cannot quite see the dream clearly enough to blame it. The contamination has seen to that. He knows, in the way you know things that you cannot articulate, that something is wrong, that he is not what he might have been, that the life he has is not the life he was promised. But he cannot follow that knowing to its source, cannot trace it back through the plant and the radiation and the $50 million fine that was never paid and the violations that were never corrected and the germ lab that his mother tried to shut down in 1969, all the way back to the mansion on the hill where an old man glows green in the dark and waits to not die. He cannot see all of this. So he sees what is in front of him, the couch, the television, the family, and he decides, in the way that people who cannot see the whole picture make decisions, that this is enough, that this is the dream, the version of it that is actually available to him, and that he will take it and be grateful and not look too hard at the shape of the thing he could not have. There is something in this that the show has never quite let itself say directly, but that every episode, in its way, implies. The dream is real, the dream is accessible, the dream is the couch and the television and the family, not the mansion and the money and the power. Homer has the dream. It is just smaller than the version he was sold. Burns has what Homer was promised. Homer has what actually matters. And Springfield, in the contamination theory's darkest reading, exists to ensure that this exchange is never named, never questioned, never placed in the light where it could be examined and found to be the grotesque inversion of justice that it is. The show has been naming it anyway. For 37 years, quietly, through the accumulated weight of 342 violations, and a three-eyed fish, and a dreaming man in a hospital, and a baby who will not speak, and a neighbor whose goodness goes unrewarded, and a town that votes to forget, the show has been naming it. We have been watching. We have been absorbing the name, episode by episode, without quite managing to hear it. This video is an attempt to hear it. Springfield is America. The contamination is the gap. Burns is the arrangement. Homer is all of us. And the love, the stubborn, damaged, inadequate, irreplaceable love in the yellow house at the end of the quiet street is the thing we are all trying to protect, underneath everything else, from everything else. The question of Homer's dreams within the dream. There is a layer of the coma theory that rarely gets discussed, perhaps because it is so recursive that most people who encounter it decide it goes too far. But in the interests of completeness, in the spirit of following every thread to wherever it leads, let us go there. If every episode since April 1993 is Homer's dream, then the episodes within that period that specifically depict Homer dreaming are dreams within the dream. And there are many of them. Homer dreams about food obsessively, generating entire fantasy sequences around specific foods, specific meals, specific visions of abundance. Homer dreams about his past, in episodes that use dreams as a framing device for flashback content. Homer dreams about alternate versions of his life, in episodes like the one where he explores what would have happened if he had made different choices at specific turning points. These dreams within the dream have a specific quality in the coma theory's reading. They are the unconscious mind of a man in a coma trying to process the question of what might have been. The alternate life episodes are not merely comedy. They are the dreaming Homer working through the specific decisions that led to the life he is living, or dreaming, trying to understand whether different choices could have produced a different outcome. The most famous of these is the episode where Homer imagines what his life would be like if he had not married Marge. The episode gives him a version of his life in which he is financially successful, professionally accomplished, and personally attractive to the kind of women he could never attract in his actual life. He is by conventional measures better off. And then the episode shows him encountering Marge in this alternate life, and the pull toward her is so complete and so immediate and so unambiguous that the alternate life's advantages become irrelevant the moment she enters it. He would choose her again. In every version of his life, he would make all the same choices again if the alternative was a life without her. The coma theory reads this as the dreaming mind working through its own question. Is the life I built worth the cost? Is the love I have for this woman, this family, this small life in this contaminated town, worth everything that life required me to give up? Every alternate life episode in this reading is Homer's unconscious posing and then answering this question. Every time the answer is yes. This is why the dream continues. Not because Homer cannot wake up, or not only because of that, but because the dream keeps arriving at the same conclusion. The life worth living is the one he has, and the love worth having is the one he has, and the family worth dreaming of is the one waiting for him in the yellow house. The dreams within the dream are him convincing himself over and over that the dream is the right dream. That even knowing what it has cost him, even knowing what the plant has done to him, and what Burns has done to his family, and what the contamination has done to his capacity to see clearly, this is the life he would choose. He is persuading himself, or he is being honest with himself. The distinction may not matter from inside the coma. The conclusion is the same either way. He loves them. He chose them. He would choose them again. The dream keeps running because that conclusion keeps being true. The geography of the heart. Springfield as internal landscape. We have talked about Springfield's geography as a regulatory shield and as the product of a dreaming mind and as a collective choice by a community that prefers not to be located. But there is a fourth reading of Springfield's geography that is perhaps the most beautiful of all the available readings, and it is the reading that the coma theory points toward without quite arriving at. Homer has lived in Springfield his entire life. He was born there, or near there. He went to school there. He fell in love there. He built his family there. He has worked for the plant for his entire professional life. Springfield is not just a location for Homer. It is the external form of his internal life. It is the geography of everything he has ever been and everyone he has ever loved. When the dreaming Homer constructs Springfield, he is not constructing a representation of an actual place. He is constructing the world as he has experienced it, organized not by geography but by emotional salience. The things that matter to him are close together. The things that do not are absent or impossible to reach. The geography of Springfield, inconsistent and self-contradicting and impossible to fix on any real map, is the geography of a human life organized by love rather than by space. This is why the plant is always visible on the horizon. The plant is where Homer works, where he spends most of his waking hours, where the central fact of his adult life, the necessity of providing for his family, is enacted every day. It is close because it is important. It is always visible because it can never be forgotten. This is why the church is nearby but somehow never quite central. Homer's relationship with religion is ambivalent. He goes, sometimes. He believes, approximately. The church exists in Springfield the way it exists in Homer's life. Present, nearby, but not the organizing principle. This is why Ned's house is right next door. Ned is Homer's conscience, the person whose goodness makes Homer's failures visible, whose proximity is both a comfort and an accusation. You cannot get away from Ned in Springfield because Homer cannot get away from the part of himself that Ned represents. This is why Moe's bar is always walkable, always accessible, always there when Homer needs it. The bar is Homer's retreat, his alone time in a life organized around family. It is as close to Evergreen Terrace as it needs to be, which is very close. And this is why the mansion on the hill where Burns lives is visible from everywhere but never quite reachable except by appointment, by summons. Burns is the power that organizes Homer's life, but that Homer cannot approach on his own terms. He is always there, always visible, always the backdrop against which the smaller life in the yellow house is lived. But he is up on the hill. He is not in the neighborhood. He is seen from a distance, understood in outline, never engaged with directly except on Burns's own terms. Springfield's impossible geography is the geography of Homer's heart. Everything is exactly where his love has placed it. Everything is as close or as far as his emotional relationship to it requires. The map cannot be real because it is not a map of a place. It is a map of a life. The Simpsons movie, The Dome as Reckoning. In 2007, The Simpsons movie was released, and it contained, in its central premise, the most direct engagement with the contamination theory that the franchise has ever produced. The EPA placed a dome over Springfield, a literal, physical barrier between the contaminated town and the rest of the United States. The federal government's position, as expressed through the plot, was that Springfield had become too toxic, too contaminated, too dangerous to its surroundings to be permitted to remain in contact with the rest of the country. The dome is the contamination theory made into a plot. It is the acknowledgement by the story itself that Springfield's contamination is real, that it is severe, that external authorities have recognized it as beyond the acceptable threshold, that the world outside Springfield has finally taken the action that Springfield itself has never been capable of taking. And the residents of Springfield are outraged. They do not respond to the dome with relief, with the recognition that the government has finally done what should have been done decades ago, with gratitude that the contamination is being acknowledged and addressed. They respond with rage at the dome itself, at the confinement, at the disruption to their normal lives. This is the denial machine in its most complete expression. The government installs a dome specifically because Springfield is too contaminated to be left uncontained, and Springfield's response is to treat the dome as the problem. The contamination which the dome exists to address disappears from the residents' analysis. The dome is the grievance. The contamination is invisible. Homer caused the dome. He is responsible, in the film's plot, for the incident that triggered the EPA's response. And Homer spends much of the film dealing with the consequences of this, being expelled from Springfield along with his family, trying to reckon with what he has done. His reckoning is partial and imperfect, because Homer's reckonings are always partial and imperfect, and he saves the town in the end through the kind of impulsive act of physical courage that does not require the cognitive capacities the contamination has degraded. The dome is lowered. Springfield is free. The contamination continues. The movie's ending is, in the contamination theory's reading, the most honest available statement about the situation. Springfield's crisis was addressed not by addressing the contamination, but by removing the symbol of the contamination's acknowledgement. The dome is gone. Burns is still on the hill. The plant is still operating. The fish in the river still have 3 eyes. Nothing has changed except that the government's intervention has been reversed, and the facade of normalcy has been restored. The residents of Springfield celebrate. They are free. They have their town back. The dome is the worst thing that ever happened to them, and now the dome is gone, and they can return to the life they have always lived. The contamination is still there. The contamination is always still there. The dome was not the problem. The dome was the only honest thing that ever happened to Springfield. What the show knows about itself. The Simpsons is one of the most self-aware programs in the history of American television. It has been breaking the fourth wall, acknowledging its own artificiality, referencing its own production history and commercial context and cultural position for 37 years. Characters within the show have noted that they are in a television show. Characters have noted the specific conventions of television that the show is employing. Characters have noticed the laugh track, the narrative reset, the existence of network standards, the relationship between advertising revenue and content decisions. This self-awareness extends to the theories. The show knows about the contamination theory. It knows about the coma theory. It knows about the denial machine theory. It has referenced, directly and indirectly, all of them, sometimes in ways that seem like confirmation, and sometimes in ways that seem like deliberate misdirection, and sometimes in ways that are impossible to read as either. The executive producer who denied the coma theory in a 2015 interview is the same executive producer who has overseen seasons of the show that have produced some of the most compelling evidence for the coma theory. Either he is genuinely unaware of the pattern he has been building, which seems unlikely given his intelligence and his decades of engagement with the show's subtext, or he is aware of it and has decided to deny it publicly for reasons that are not entirely apparent. The denial is itself a piece of evidence. A show that had nothing to hide about its structure would not need to preemptively deny theories about its structure. A producer who believed the coma theory was simply wrong would not need to address it at all. The denial, in the coma theory's reading, is the show doing what Springfield does, acknowledging the truth it cannot officially confirm by specifically and publicly denying it. The show knows what it is. It has always known what it is. It has been telling you what it is for 37 years, through every episode, through every frame of every episode, through the specific choices of what to show, and what to leave in shadow, and what to deny, and what to let stand as evidence for anyone paying close enough attention. The theories are not imposed on the show from outside. They are the show read correctly. They are what the show looks like when you watch it the way it has always wanted to be watched. With patience, with attention, with the willingness to follow every thread to wherever it leads, even when it leads somewhere that the comedy has been carefully arranged to prevent you from going. Springfield is broken. The family inside it persists. The love survives the damage. The show has been telling you this since 1989. Tonight, finally, you heard it. End of script. The full history of Evergreen Terrace. The house that holds everything. The address is 742 Evergreen Terrace. The house is a 1.5-story structure with a detached garage, a kitchen at the back, a living room with the blue couch, a staircase, and an upstairs with 4 bedrooms, 2 for the children, 1 for Homer and Marge, and 1 that has been variously used for storage and for various plot-specific purposes. The exterior is pink. The roof is gray. There is a dead tree in the front yard and a car in the driveway that changes model year in ways that the floating timeline does not bother to explain. This house is the most thoroughly described domestic space in American popular culture. More people in the world can navigate it from memory than can navigate Buckingham Palace or the White House or any other famous address. They know where the couch is. They know the approximate location of the kitchen table. They know that Homer's bedroom is at the top of the stairs to the right, and that Bart's room is painted in ways that reflect his character, and that Lisa's room contains her saxophone and her books, and the particular quality of loneliness that a brilliant child accumulates in a world too small for her. The contamination theory reads the house as the physical evidence of what has been done to the family. It is not a house that a safety inspector at a nuclear plant should be able to afford, which is to say it is not a house that reflects Homer's actual earning power honestly. Homer's salary, as depicted in various episodes when specific figures are mentioned, should not be sufficient to maintain this house in this neighborhood, to raise 3 children, to support the lifestyle that the Simpsons demonstrably live. The gap between what Homer earns and what the family requires is one of the show's persistent background mysteries, usually treated as a given rather than examined. The contamination theory fills this gap with the Abe Burns deal. Homer's tenure at the plant is guaranteed. His salary is protected. He cannot be fired. The compensation package, which includes the salary and the health insurance that Homer has specifically cited as his reason for staying, is part of an arrangement made before he was old enough to understand arrangements. The house is not something Homer earned. The house is something he was given, indirectly and without his knowledge, as part of a transaction that took his mother in exchange. The coma theory reads the house differently. In the coma theory, the house is the most important object in the dream, more important than any character, more important than any plot. The house is what Homer is dreaming toward. It is the symbol and the substance of the life he wants, a place that belongs to his family, that is theirs, that contains them. The specific details of the house, the ones that have been consistent across 37 years of episodes, are the details that mattered most to Homer in the moment before he went into the coma. The couch is blue because it was blue. The kitchen table has the specific chairs it has because those are the chairs Homer remembers. The dead tree in the front yard is dead because it was dead, because dreams do not improve the details, they remember them. The house is a memory. The family inside it is a memory. The show is a 37-year meditation on a single house and the people in it. And the meditation is an act of love so sustained and so specific that it becomes its own argument for the value of the ordinary life. 742 Evergreen Terrace. The address is as permanent as any address in fiction, as permanent as Baker Street or Grimold Place or Bag End. More permanent, perhaps, because it is an address anyone could have, a number and a street that could be in any town. The universality of the address is the universality of what the address contains. A family, a couch, an evening, the ordinary miracle of being together. The house will not be torn down. The show will not let it be torn down. Every episode in which it is threatened, by natural disaster or supernatural event or the plots of villains, ends with its restoration. The house is the first and the last thing. Everything else in Springfield is peripheral. This is why the show began there, with the family assembling in the living room, and why it returns there at the end of so many episodes, and why the couch gag, which has been the show's opening ritual for 37 years, always ends with the family on the couch, together, in position, ready for the evening to begin. The couch gag is the show's thesis statement. The family will always arrive at the couch, no matter how absurd the path, no matter what impossible or surreal circumstances intervene between the opening of the episode and its resolution, the family will end up on the couch, together, in the house, at the address. This is what Homer is dreaming. This is what the show is. The yellow skin as language, reading what Springfield's bodies say. We have discussed the yellow skin as a possible symptom of radiation-induced biological change. But the yellow skin does something more than that within the semiotics of the show, and the contamination theory, fully developed, attends to this additional dimension. All of Springfield's permanent residents are yellow. This is the visual marker of belonging. To be yellow in Springfield is to be of Springfield, to be part of the population that has been shaped by the town's particular conditions, to carry in your skin the evidence of what this place has done to you. Visitors are not yellow. They carry their normal skin tones, whatever those happen to be, and the visual contrast between them and the Springfield residents is constant and immediate. You can tell, at a glance, who belongs and who is passing through. The skin does this work automatically. It is a diagnostic tool for community membership. The contamination theory reads this visual grammar as the show's most transparent admission of what Springfield is. The town has a visual language for contamination. The contamination is written on every resident's body, and because it is written on every body equally, because the mark is universal within the community, it reads not as disfigurement, but as identity. The yellow is not what was done to them. The yellow is who they are. This is how contamination works at a community level over a long enough time. The initial generation that was contaminated knows, on some level, that they were changed, that the change was imposed on them by a force outside their control. But subsequent generations are born into the condition. For them, the yellow is not a change from something previous. It is simply the way things are. The baseline is contaminated. The contamination is the baseline. There is no memory of before, no comparison available, no sense of loss because there is no awareness of what was lost. Homer does not know he is yellow. He has always been yellow. His father was yellow. His children are yellow. The concept of yellowness as a departure from a previous state is not available to him because the previous state is not within his experiential range. He has no access to the version of himself that existed before the contamination because the contamination predates his own consciousness. The visitors who arrive without yellow skin are the contamination theory's evidence from outside. They are the control group. They are what human beings look like in the absence of Springfield's specific environmental conditions. Their normalcy is the measure of Springfield's deviation, and the deviation is written on every yellow face in the show's 37-year visual record. The show put this in front of you in every frame of every episode since 1989. The language was always there. The yellow was always the evidence. The visual difference between the permanent residents and the visitors was always the diagnostic. Nobody asks about it because everyone in Springfield is yellow and the yellow is normal, and asking about the normal is not something people do. Not in Springfield. Not with their particular cognitive architecture. Not when the question, if properly followed, leads somewhere that the denial machine needs to ensure they never arrive. The yellow skin is the contamination's signature. The contamination's author is on the hill, in the mansion, glowing green after his treatments. His skin is not yellow. His skin is the color of someone whose contamination operates differently, whose radiation has been calibrated for his particular biology, whose exposure is managed and targeted rather than ambient and chronic. Burns is green. Springfield is yellow. The color difference is the power difference. The color difference is the whole story, specific episodes, and the theories they support. An annotated guide. The contamination theory and its companion theories are not abstract frameworks imposed on the show from outside. They emerge from specific episodes, specific scenes, specific details that the show has put in front of its audience and then allowed to pass without comment. What follows is a closer examination of some of the most significant of these moments, the ones that any serious student of the theories must account for. The first is the episode in which Homer's car is hit by a radioactive truck and begins to glow. The truck is from Burns's plant. The glow is the radiation. Homer drives home in the glowing car, parks it in the driveway, and the neighbors observe it with varying degrees of alarm. The episode's resolution involves the car being towed. The radiation, the ongoing radiation from the plant, is not addressed. This episode is a version of the three-eyed fish joke told in a more personal register. The contamination is not merely in the water. It is in the road. It is in the places Homer travels. It follows him home. The line between the plant and Evergreen Terrace is not a metaphorical line. It is a literal one, traveled every day by a man who carries the contamination back from the facility to the neighborhood. The second significant episode is the one in which Homer discovers he has a lump in his body. The discovery is treated comedically. The lump is not the cancer it initially appears to be. Homer does not have cancer. Homer is, inexplicably and repeatedly, not harmed by the specific things that should harm him most. The radiation, the poor diet, the physical risks of his various side jobs. He is remarkably durable for a man in his situation. The contamination theory has two possible readings of this durability. The first is that the contamination has altered Homer's biology in ways that also confer resistance to certain kinds of acute physical harm, in the same way that Burns's contamination has produced his particular grotesque biological persistence. The second, which is perhaps more emotionally resonant, is that Homer is unkillable within the dream, not because of his biology, but because of his role. He is the dreamer. The dream cannot kill the dreamer. The third episode, or rather cluster of episodes, is the group of episodes that explore the specific mechanics of the plant's operations, various safety procedures, or their absence. The control room where Homer sits, with its various systems and indicators. The specific locations within the plant where incidents have occurred. These episodes, taken together, create a map of a facility that is not merely poorly managed, but actively dangerous, that has been dangerous continuously, that has never been brought into a state where it is not dangerous. The contamination theory reads these episodes as the show's documentary record. They are not just comedy settings. They are the accumulation of evidence about what the plant is and what the plant does, presented in enough detail across enough episodes that the resulting picture is comprehensive and specific. The show has been documenting the facility for 37 years. The documentation, taken as a whole, is damning. The fourth set of significant moments is the group of scenes in which Homer almost articulates what he knows. There are moments in the show, scattered across its run, when Homer is on the verge of something, when the narrative context has aligned in a way that would, for a person with more intact critical reasoning, produce the insight. He is standing at the plant, looking at something that should trigger the connection, or he is sitting at home, and something has happened that should produce the synthesis. And Homer gets very close. And then something interrupts. A donut. A joke, his own incompetence at the level of sustained attention required to hold the pieces together long enough to see the picture. These near misses are the most poignant moments in the contamination theory's reading of the show. They are Homer almost understanding what has been done to him, almost following the thread, almost arriving at the conclusion. And then the conclusion slips away, as it always slips away, and Homer returns to the couch, and the episode ends, and the next episode begins from baseline. The contamination theory says he was close. He is always close. The radiation has left him just far enough from the connection that he cannot quite make it. Not so far that he cannot function, not so far that he cannot love his family, just far enough that the most important understanding of his own life remains one step beyond what he is capable of reaching. This is the cruelest aspect of what the contamination has done. Not the degraded IQ, not the four fingers or the yellow skin or the incompetence at his job. It is the specific calibration of the damage, which has left Homer in a state where he can see that something is wrong but cannot follow that seeing to where it leads. He carries the evidence of his own exploitation in his own body, and he cannot read it. He is surrounded by the story of what has been done to him, and he cannot tell it. Burns calibrated this. The contamination theory's most disturbing proposition is that this calibration was not accidental. Burns has spent a century studying radiation's effects on human cognition because his own survival depends on understanding those effects. He knows where the line is. He knows the level of exposure that produces functional incapacity in the specific cognitive modes most relevant to recognizing and challenging his arrangement. He has been maintaining that level in the Springfield environment for decades. Homer is the proof that the calibration works. He is the demonstration that you can take a man who is capable of love, capable of labor, capable of the basic social functions of citizenship, and you can degrade him in one specific way, in the precise way that prevents him from connecting the dots that would lead to your accountability, without degrading anything else. Homer is exactly as broken as Burns needs him to be. No more, no less. The calibration is precise. The night this was made. Somewhere, right now, it is late. Someone is in a room, the lights low, the house quiet, the day finished. Maybe they are in Springfield's time zone, which does not exist because Springfield does not exist. More likely they are somewhere real, a city or a town or a village in one of the 190-some countries where The Simpsons has been broadcast. Maybe they grew up with the show. Maybe they encountered it late, discovering it in the way people discover old things that have always been there. Maybe they have watched hundreds of episodes. Maybe they have watched all of them, the canonical achievement of someone with the right combination of devotion and time. Maybe they are watching this video because they love the show and they want to love it more carefully, to see in it what it has been trying to show them for longer than many of them have been alive. This is The Simpsons audience. It has always been this person, alone, late, thinking about a cartoon, thinking, through the cartoon, about the things the cartoon is about family and love and the gap between what was promised and what was delivered, about the house that always stays the same and the people inside it who never age, and the town around them that has been breaking for 37 years and somehow never quite breaks. The theories we have discussed tonight are not definitive. They are not proven. They cannot be proven, because they are theories about a fictional world, and fictional worlds do not yield proof in the way that the real world sometimes does. What they are is coherent. What they are is grounded in the specific details of a show that has been putting those details in front of its audience since 1989. What they are is one way of looking at something you have probably been looking at for a long time and seeing it with a slightly different quality of attention. You know the family. You have always known them. The contamination theory says, the family has been telling you what has been done to them, and the telling has been hiding in the comedy, and the comedy has been making the telling bearable. The coma theory says, the family exists inside the mind of a man who loves them so much that he built a world for them to live in, and the world is running, and it will keep running for as long as the man is running. The denial machine theory says, the family lives in a town that has decided to survive by not seeing, and the decision is understandable, and the cost of it is everything. And the love theory, which is the theory that underlies all the others, the theory that the show has been making since its first episode and will be making until its last, says, none of the rest of it matters as much as this. The contamination is real. The coma may be real. The denial machine is definitely real. And in spite of all of it, in the middle of all of it, there is a man who loves his family, and a family that loves each other imperfectly and completely, and a house where they sit together in the evenings and watch television on the blue couch and are, in those moments, everything they need to be. The love is the theory the show was always building toward. The contamination and the coma and the denial machine and the billionaire on the hill and the silent genius in the corner and the neighbor whose goodness goes unrewarded and the town that voted to forget and the timeline that refuses to move are all the things the love has to survive, and the love survives them. In every episode, In every season, in every year of 37 years of a show that should have ended long ago and has not. The love is why it has not ended. The love is the answer to every question the theories raise. The love is what you will remember when you wake up tomorrow, of everything you learned tonight in the yellow town that does not appear on any map, where the fish have 3 eyes and the sky is orange at sunset, and somewhere on a hill, a very old man glows green in the dark and thinks about the 130 years he has survived, and does not think about what they have cost. The love, the blue couch, the family, the evening that never ends. Good night from Springfield. A final note: why these theories matter beyond the show. We have been talking about a cartoon. Let us be honest about this. The Simpsons is a cartoon. The contamination theory is a theory about a cartoon town. The coma theory is a theory about a cartoon man. The denial machine is a theory about a cartoon community. None of the characters are real. None of the suffering has been suffered by anyone. The 3-eyed fish has never existed. The nuclear plant is an animated building. Burns is a drawing. All of this is true, and yet, the reason these theories have persisted for decades, have been developed and refined and shared and argued over in fan communities, in academic papers, in YouTube videos, in late-night conversations, is not that the show is particularly mysterious or that the writers have hidden particularly deep secrets. It is that the theories are accurate, not about the show, about the world. There are real towns that have been contaminated by real industrial facilities. There are real communities whose fish have been mutated by real runoff. There are real populations whose cognitive function has been demonstrably affected by real environmental toxins. There are real regulatory bodies that have failed to act, real violations that have gone unaddressed, real fines that have not been paid. There are real billionaires who have spent real money ensuring that the real accountability mechanisms cannot reach them. There are real communities that have voted to forget because the alternative was too costly. Real places where the truth was exiled because the truth was inconvenient. Real institutions that maintained comfortable fictions long after the fictions had been exposed. Real judges and real decrees and real trains taking real people away from the places that needed them. The Simpsons is a cartoon. But the things it is a cartoon about are not cartoons. The contamination is a cartoon version of the contamination that has happened to real communities. The denial machine is a cartoon version of the mechanisms that real communities have used to survive real impositions. Burns is a cartoon version of the people who have built real systems of institutional protection for real fortunes derived from real harm. And Homer, fumbling through his dream in his contaminated body with his damaged brain and his enormous incapacity and his stubborn, unkillable love, is a cartoon version of the people who have lived inside these systems. The people who went to work every morning at the plant that was slowly killing them because their families needed the health insurance. The people who loved their children with everything they had left after the day was done. The people who sat on their couches with their families in the evenings and felt, in spite of everything, that this was worth something, that they were worth something. The theories matter because the people they are about matter. The contamination theory honors the real people who have lived in real Springfields. The coma theory honors the real capacity of love to sustain itself in the face of catastrophic damage. The denial machine theory honors the real effort it takes to maintain a community's dignity when the conditions of that community's existence have been designed against it. Homer Simpson is not real. The people Homer represents are, we laugh at him because we recognize him. We love him because he is us, or he is the people who raised us, or he is the person we are afraid we might be, or the person we hope we are when the lights are low, and the day is done, and the family is around us, and the television is on, and the love is enough. He is enough. He has always been enough. Springfield is broken. The love inside it persists. The loop turns. The dream continues. The evening never ends. We are all Homer Simpson. We are all in the yellow house. We are all, in the ways that matter most, still sitting on the blue couch, surrounded by the people we have chosen, watching the screen in the dark, waiting to see what happens next. What happens next is the same thing that always happens next. The family stays together, the house holds, the love survives, it always does. Good night. End of script. The secondary characters as system. Springfield's full ecosystem of damage. We have spent most of tonight on the main family, on Homer and Marge and the children, on Burns and Ned, and a handful of the other Springfield residents whose stories intersect directly with the contamination theory's central arguments. But Springfield is not just the Simpsons and Burns and Flanders. It is an entire ecosystem of secondary characters, each one carrying their own relationship to the contamination, to the denial machine, to the floating timeline, to the specific quality of damage that the town has administered to every person who has lived inside it. Mo Sislak, the bartender, the man behind the bar at Moe's Tavern for the entire run of the show, his face arranged in a permanent expression of defeated aspiration that has been his characteristic presentation since the first time we saw him. Mo is not a simple character despite the simplicity of his function within the show's plots. He has a past that the show has revealed in fragments across various episodes, a past that includes genuine ambition and genuine talent and the specific series of circumstances that converted both of these things into the bartender who serves Homer and Barney their drinks every evening. He was a child boxer. He had skill enough to be considered promising. He was never able to develop that promise into anything lasting. He runs a bar that barely survives economically. He is, by all available evidence, profoundly lonely in a way that goes beyond the structural loneliness of the bartender who hears everyone else's problems and has nowhere to bring his own. He has attempted and failed at romantic relationships in ways that suggest something more than bad luck. A fundamental difficulty with the specific emotional intimacy that sustained relationships require. The contamination theory reads Mo as a case study in what long-term radiation exposure does to a person whose particular vulnerabilities are emotional, rather than intellectual. Homer's damage is primarily cognitive. Barney's is primarily executive function. Moe's is, in the theory's reading, primarily affective. The specific neural architecture that underlies trust and intimacy and the willingness to be vulnerable with another person has been degraded. He can maintain surface social function. He can run a bar. He can sustain the specific kinds of interaction that bars require. Transactional, limited, defined by context. But the deeper engagement, the sustained vulnerability that love requires, is not accessible to him in the way it should be. He knows this. There is a quality of Moe's loneliness that is conscious and painful in a way that Homer's various deficits are not. Homer often does not know he is damaged. Mo knows. He knows the distance between what he wants and what he is able to sustain, and the knowing is part of the damage. An awareness without the capacity to act on that awareness in the ways it would require. He stays in the bar. The bar is his contamination zone. Within the contamination zone, the space where his particular damage is manageable, where the rules of engagement are clear enough that his impaired capacity for deeper connection does not disqualify him from participation. He serves the drinks, he listens. He knows where Homer and Barney and the others are at the level they allow him to know, which is closer than anywhere else they go. It is not nothing. In Springfield, it is not nothing. Then there is Chief Clancy Wiggum, Springfield's police chief, whose relationship to justice and law enforcement is the denial machine personified in a single job description. Wiggum is not corrupt in the way that cartoon cops are often depicted as corrupt. He does not take specific bribes for specific favors in a way that suggests intentional malice. He is corrupt in the much more insidious way that the contamination theory proposes. His capacity to connect his observations to their implications has been degraded enough that he genuinely cannot see what his function requires him to see. He investigates the Burns shooting and finds the wrong answer, not because he is bribed to find the wrong answer, but because his investigative capacity is insufficient to find the right one. He manages the Sideshow Bob situation through a combination of incompetence and forgetting that ensures Bob can always return regardless of the sentence he receives. He is present at dozens of the most alarming events in Springfield's history and consistently fails to respond to them in ways that would produce accountability. This is the contamination's most useful product for Burns. Not a corrupt police force that he has purchased, but a cognitively impaired police force that cannot see what is happening clearly enough to be a threat. You do not need to bribe a chief who cannot connect the three-eyed fish to the plant. You do not need to threaten an investigator who cannot hold the relevant evidence in working memory long enough to follow it to its conclusion. The contamination has done this work for Burns. The police force is neutered by the same mechanism that has neutered the rest of the town. Wiggum has a son, Ralph, who is in Bart's class, and who is perhaps the show's most sustained investigation of what the contamination does to the developing brain. Ralph Wiggum's non sequiturs, his disconnection from the causal logic that governs most communication, his statements that emerge from a cognitive architecture so far from the normal that they have become a kind of comedy genre unto themselves, are presented as the most lovable form of dimness. He is not cruel, he is not mean. He is simply somewhere else, in a mental world that does not quite intersect with the one everyone around him occupies. The contamination theory does not need to argue that Ralph's condition is specifically caused by the plant. It only needs to note that Springfield produces Ralph Wiggums in abundance, that the specific quality of his cognitive disconnection is not unusual in Springfield, that the town has normalized a level of neurological difference that in any other context would trigger concern and intervention and investigation of its causes. Ralph is not an anomaly in Springfield. Ralph is a point on a spectrum that runs from him, through Barney, through Homer, through the general population, a spectrum that the contamination theory argues is the specific signature of long-term environmental radiation exposure in a developing population. Springfield loves Ralph. This is important. The show presents him with genuine affection, and the audience has taken him to heart in a way that is not about condescension or pity, but about genuine warmth. He is, in the clarity of his simple connection to the moment he is in, without the complicated overlay of anxiety and strategy and self-consciousness that most consciousness brings to experience, a kind of accidental mystic. His non sequiturs are not stupid. They are true in the way that things are true when the filter of social calculation has been removed. He says what he sees. He says what he feels. The contamination has taken things from him, but it has also, in its way, left him without the specific defenses that make human beings less present to each other than they otherwise could be. This is the contamination theory's most complicated emotional note. The damage is real. The damage is terrible. The damage was done by a man who knew he was doing it and continued anyway. And the people who carry the damage are not diminished by it in every respect. They are different. They have been made into versions of themselves that could not exist without the damage, and some aspects of those versions are genuinely valuable, genuinely human, genuinely worth loving. Homer's love. Barney's occasional moments of unguarded insight. Moe's specific and particular loyalty to the people who have come to his bar. Ralph's unself-conscious presence in the moment he occupies. These are not compensations for the damage. They are not arguments that the damage was acceptable. They are simply facts about the people who exist in the world the contamination made. They are worth knowing. They are worth caring about. The contamination theory does not argue that the people of Springfield would be better off if the plant had never been built. It argues that the decision was never theirs to make. It argues that Burns built the plant without their consent, contaminated their environment without their knowledge, degraded their capacity to object without their awareness, and has been operating this arrangement for over a century in a town that has no idea what it consented to by being born there. The people of Springfield are not responsible for their damage. They did not choose it. They inherited it from the water and the air and the decades of exposure that preceded their birth. They carry it because they have no choice but to carry it, because it is in them now, because it is what Springfield made them. And they love each other anyway. They build their lives anyway. They sit on their blue couches and watch their televisions and raise their children in the yellow light of an evening that the contamination has tinted but not extinguished. The love is not despite the damage. The love is alongside the damage. It is what the damage cannot touch, even in Springfield, even after all these years, even now, the last evening in Springfield. Imagine the last episode, not the one that will actually air, whenever the show eventually concludes its run. The imaginary last episode, the one that exists in the space between all the episodes that have aired and whatever ending the show's creators have privately contemplated. In this imaginary last episode, something changes. The floating timeline lands. The denial machine fails. The contamination is acknowledged. Burns faces something. The coma resolves one way or the other. The children age. We do not want this episode. Nobody who loves the show wants this episode. The episode we want is the one that has been airing for 37 years. The family together, the evening intact, the couch full, the loop running, We want the continuation. We want the blue couch and the television and the smell of whatever Marge is cooking and the sound of Bart's skateboard and the saxophone note from upstairs and Homer coming through the front door at 5:30, tired and intact and home. We want the dream. The dream knows this. Homer's dreaming mind knows this. The show knows this. The reason the loop has been running for 37 years is not that the writers cannot think of an ending. It is that the audience, which is us, which is Springfield, which is all the people who have been watching since 1989 or since whenever they discovered the show, has communicated clearly and through the most reliable mechanism available, the mechanism of continued watching, that we do not want the loop to stop. We want the contamination to be real, and we want the love to survive it. We want the coma to be Homer's heaven, and we want him to stay in his heaven. We want the denial machine to be broken, and we want Springfield to forget that it is broken by the next episode. We want Burns to be held accountable, and we want him to escape accountability and to still be there on the hill, ancient and glowing, when the next episode begins. We want Ned's goodness to be rewarded, and we want it to continue being tested because the testing is what gives the goodness its shape. We want Maggie to speak, and we want her to wait. We want the timeline to move, and we want it to stay frozen. We want everything. We want the show to be all things simultaneously, to be the documentary and the comedy, the tragedy and the love story, the political indictment and the celebration of the ordinary, the broken world and the intact family inside it. Springfield gives us this, 37 years of this, and it is not enough. And it will never be enough, because what the show is really giving us, underneath everything, is time. It is giving us the time we have already spent watching it, the hours of childhood and adolescence and adulthood, and the specific texture of sitting in front of a television with the people you love, or alone in a room late at night, watching a cartoon family navigate the specific problems that all families navigate, loving and failing and trying again. The show is the time we spent with it. The family is the families we were watching it with, or the family we were imagining, or the family we were hoping for. The yellow house is the houses we were in, whatever their color. This is why we cannot let it go, not because we are addicted to the content, but because the show is made of our time, our real human time, and letting the show end means accounting for where that time went and what it produced, and what it means that a substantial portion of our collective hours has been spent in a fictional town, in a fictional state, watching a fictional family deal with fictional versions of the real problems that organize our actual lives. We have been there, we are still there. We will be there tonight and tomorrow night and next Sunday at 8, wherever the show is airing, in whatever form it takes, for however many seasons remain. The loop will run as long as we run, and we will run for a while yet. Springfield is waiting, it always is. End of script. The patience of Marge Simpson. We have talked about Homer at length. We have talked about the contamination and what it did to him, about the coma and what it means for him, about the love that persists in him through all the damage. But we have not sufficiently talked about Marge, and Marge deserves more than a supporting role in this analysis, because Marge is doing something that none of the theories fully accounts for. Marge Simpson is keeping the family alive, not metaphorically, literally. She is the organizational intelligence, the emotional labor, the forward planning, the practical execution that stands between the Simpson family and dissolution. Homer's love is real, but it is not functional. It cannot run a household. It cannot manage the children's education, or their emotional development, or the family's finances, or the ongoing negotiations with the community that family life requires. Homer loves his family. Marge runs it. And she has been running it for 37 years in a contaminated town with a cognitively damaged husband who periodically causes containment incidents at a nuclear facility and comes home in a state that requires management, in a house that is maintained against the specific entropy that Homer's presence creates, surrounded by a community that has, as we have established, voted to forget everything inconvenient and criminalize anyone who remembers. Marge is not contaminated in the way the theory proposes. Homer is contaminated. Her intelligence is intact. Her executive function is intact. She sees the situation clearly. She has always seen it clearly. The question the contamination theory must eventually address is, what does it mean that the clearest seeing person in the Simpson household has chosen to stay? The contamination theory has a partial answer. Marge has her own damage. not the cognitive damage that degrades Homer's reasoning and Barney's executive function and the general population's capacity for critical synthesis. Marge's damage is more specific and more subtle. It is the damage of a person who has organized her entire emotional architecture around the maintenance of a relationship that requires most of her resources and who cannot, after this long, untangle herself from the architecture she has built. She has been maintaining Homer for decades. The maintenance is who she is now, not in a defeated sense, not in the sense of someone who has given up and is simply executing the minimum necessary to keep the situation stable. Marge is engaged with the maintenance the way a skilled person is engaged with the work they are best at. She is good at this. She is extraordinary at this. The family would not exist without this. But the coma theory adds something. If Homer is dreaming, then Marge, as a figure in the dream, is Homer's construction of the person he needs her to be. She is patient because he needs her to be patient. She is capable because he needs the household to function. She is beautiful and steady and a little frustrated, and ultimately loyal because these are the specific qualities of the Marge he knew, the Marge he remembers, the Marge who was sitting beside him or nearby when the vending machine fell in April 1993. She is not fully realized in the dream, in this reading, because she is not fully known. Homer loves her completely. He does not know her completely. No person knows their partner completely, and Homer knows himself least well of almost anyone in Springfield, which means his capacity to imagine his partner's inner life is limited by the limits of his own self-knowledge. The Marge of the dream is as full as Homer's understanding of her allows, which is full in some dimensions and insufficient in others. She is patient in the dream because Homer remembers her patience. She is occasionally exasperated because Homer remembers her exasperation. She has her specific quirks and her specific concerns and her specific nervous hum because Homer encoded these things in the years before the coma. But she is not fully free in the dream. She cannot grow in directions Homer has not observed. She is, in the most loving and most limiting sense, his Marge, the Marge of his memory, the Marge of April 1993, and that Marge is extraordinary, imperfect and real and capable of the specific forms of care that Homer needs, and also capable of things Homer has never adequately recognized, her own intelligence, her own desires, her own life that exists in the spaces between her management of his. The dream gives her everything Homer knows of her and nothing he doesn't, and what he knows of her is enough to fill 37 years of a show with a character that millions of people have recognized as real. This is the love's tribute to Marge. The dream makes her as fully as Homer can make her, and Homer can make her very full indeed, because whatever the contamination did to his cognition, and whatever the coma has done to his access to the world, his attention to Marge, his specific and sustained attentiveness to the person he loves, has never been degraded. He sees her. He has always seen her. The dream Marge is as real as Homer's seeing allows. The patience of Marge Simpson is the patience of being truly seen and truly loved by someone who cannot always express it correctly, who fails her regularly, who comes home with nuclear contamination on his clothes and a crayon in his brain and an IQ of 55 and an enormous, unwieldy, indestructible love aimed entirely at her and the children she has given him and the house she has made for all of them. She stays because the love is real. She stays because the house is theirs. She stays because the evening, when it is good, is enough. The contamination is real. The coma may be real. The denial machine is certainly real. And Marge is there anyway. She has always been there. She will be there when the loop turns again tomorrow and Homer comes through the door and the family assembles on the couch and the evening begins. This is her choice. After everything, it is still her choice. It means something. It has always meant something. In all of Springfield's theories and conspiracies and contaminations and denials, this is the cleanest truth. Marge Simpson stays because she wants to. And what she wants to stay for is worth wanting. The show knows this. The dream knows this. We know this. Good night, Springfield. Good night, Marge. The evening is yours.